CoCo Crew Podcast is hosted by CyberEars. If you are serious about your podcast hosting needs, you should check out CyberEars. Whether you are a podcaster, a radio host, a musician, a narrator, an audiobook author, or simply a school, church, corporation, or anyone else with an audio recording that needs to be hosted or distributed, you should check out cyberears.com. Unlimited bandwidth, fast, reliable, and rugged servers with no hidden fees. CyberEars, your audio, your terms.
It's a blast from the past.
Please listen carefully.
CoCo.
Welcome to the CoCo Crew Podcast. A delicious adventure into the world of retro computing news and information. Featuring the Tandy Color Computer.
Hey, you got your CoCo 3 yet?
CoCo.
All right. Welcome back, CoCo Cruisers. You're listening to episode 51 of the CoCo Crew Podcast. Wow. Time flies, keeps on marching. Tandy Assembly is like a month away. We'll be having a fun time before long there in Springfield, Ohio. That leaves our next CoCo Fest is about 8 months away. So we got a little time to get ready for that as we recover from Tandy Assembly. Everyone excited for those events?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Very exciting. Definitely looking forward to all that. So who's working on stuff? Who's done something cool lately? Anyone? Everyone overtaken by the summer?
I haven't been doing any projects, but I've definitely been doing a lot of CoCoing. Just, hacking and stuff, so it's kind of fun.
Well, that's cool. Sometimes that's the best thing.
Yeah, just having fun with the machine, I finally got the 2 meg Triad board installed. That's nice.
Nice.
And just been, playing around with the Nitrous 9 and some terminal software, and just having a good time.
Well, that's kind of what it's all about, right? Just making some time to use it and have some fun. Maybe it charges you up, perhaps for your next project or whatever. Cool.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool stuff. Anyone else? I haven't done too much myself, except a little bit of research on what turned into our tech segment, and that was actually started out as related to some playing around with what may be a future tech segment, messing around some with the CoCo pilot programming language. Not really ready to report much there, but it's a little bit fun to mess around and play with some new stuff. And sometimes I just enjoy reading the tech documentation on old stuff, just saying, oh, that's how they did that, that kind of stuff. So anyway, well, it's into summer. We all have better things to do, maybe. So it's good that somebody's doing something. What about acquisitions? Anybody get anything cool on eBay or maybe not on eBay recently? No. I been stocking up on parts for building Game Master cartridges. Had actually run out of the initial run of PCBs and parts, and selling off waterfall carts and some developer kits and whatever. And like I said, now I've got new parts, and so that may be a way to keep busy here in a little bit. I did buy a collection of Rainbow on Tape cassettes, which I think all that stuff's in the archive, but it's just nice to have the physical stuff,
That's great.
Yeah, so that might be cool. Oh, yeah, I did. That was a funny thing. So I mentioned that the one time one of our listeners had sent me a little project that they had done that made some noise or whatever. And he had sent me some feedback after the last episode where I mentioned them. And then I bought on eBay, I bought a paper tape for running on an MSI machine.
Oh, wow.
Which has nothing to do with the CoCo. But it turns out that the person I bought it from, which I didn't know, because you don't see names for sellers anymore, but it turns out it's just the same fellow. So I do have an MSI machine. I actually do have a paper tape reader, so that might be fun or nostalgic or just goofy. Who knows? But funny that we get that close in the same person or whatever. Anyway, anyone else got anything cool or new and cool or whatever?
I definitely can't notice that.
I'd like to do something with paper tape and the CoCo. It's a little bit of a forced project, but something would be cool.
That could happen.
All right, well, that's probably enough to get us started. Ron, you still out there? I should introduce you guys. So this is, of course, John Linville here with Neil Blanchard, we've heard, and Mike Rowan. You out there, Myro?
I'm out here drinking from the fire hose of life.
Yeah. And then Boise Pete, I think we heard him chuckle. Hello, Boise.
Hey, guys.
And Mr. Ron Klein. How you doing, Ron?
Hey, everybody. And Mike, I'm going to pull up a stool next to you. I got the same issues.
Yeah, crazy busy.
So, anyway, well, for the next hour or so, you at least can take a break here with us. Speaking of breaks, why don't we take a little break now, and then we'll be back with our announcements.
If you love Tandy computers, you don't want to miss Tandy Assembly. Tandy Assembly is North America's only event dedicated entirely to Tandy and Radio Shack computers. From the Z80-based systems, Pocket computers, Color computers, and MC10, and the full line of Intel-based PC compatibles. Meet others who share your passion for these unique computer systems. Enjoy seeing systems on display by exhibitors. Meet hardware and software vendors from across the globe who are still expanding and supporting Tandy and Radio Shack computers. Meet old friends and make new ones. And don't forget the no minimum bid auction. You might just find what you've been looking for. Proceeds from the auction go toward the costs of the show. Your generous donations to the auction are appreciated. There's something for everyone at Tandy Assembly. And this year, we've added an extra day for Tandy Tech Track. For a small additional fee, you will have access to in-depth technical presentations. Plus, dinner is included. Tandy Assembly is held at the Courtyard Marriott downtown in Springfield, Ohio, just 30 minutes from Dayton International Airport. Tandy Tech Track begins on Friday, 27 September, and the General Tandy Assembly is held on Saturday and Sunday, 28 and 29 September, 2019. Register online at tandyassembly.com. Be a part of the only computer show dedicated to Tandy and Radio Shack computers. Tandy Assembly.
All right. Welcome back, CoCo Cruisers. Now it's time for our announcements. As we said, you were listening to the CoCo Crew Podcast, but we are also available on Twitter as at CoCo Crew Podcast. That's all one word, CoCocrewPodcast. So if you're prone to sending tweets, feel free to tweet at us. We may actually tweet back. We are, of course, also available on Facebook. We have a Facebook group called The CoCo Crew Podcast, and that's 4 words with spaces in between, just because, that's the way we like it. But if you are on the Book of Faces, do feel free to reach out, join the group, send us a greeting or feedback, or just monitor the group and see what news or other postings come across. It's not an exclusive thing. We don't want you to drop the CoCo group and join just our group. Some people seem to want to do that with their groups, but no, we want you to be part of the greater community. But if you're part of our group, you'll at least get our news a little bit quicker. So come on and check us out. Let's see. We are, of course, a podcast, so we are available on iTunes, or I guess it's now what? I should change that. It's to Apple Music. Is that what they call it now? Anyway, it was iTunes. We're available there. Also available on Google Play. Actually, you can use just about whatever podcasting app you want. The RSS feed is available through the CoCoCrew.org website. If you prefer to stream live, then we are available through Stitcher and the service called TuneIn. TuneIn, of course, is used by Alexa. If you have a smart speaker in your house, then just feel free once in a while to shout out, Alexa, play the CoCo Crew Podcast, and see what comes up. Wonder if we can catch anyone this time with that one. All right, we have been taking our audio podcasts and converting them mechanically into a video episodes and making them available on YouTube. So if you prefer to get your podcasts with a video slant, feel free to check us out. It's not a great video. It's mostly just pictures of our logo and our show notes, but it is a way to access us through YouTube. We do get a few views over there, and I know some people have expressed that if English is not your first language, then sometimes it's a little easier to digest the English if you turn on the subtitles, which YouTube is able to generate real time, apparently, or at least while you're viewing it. And it may be a little easier to consume some of our peculiar accents, shall we say. Anyway, speaking of video episodes, I haven't checked in a while, but last I checked, we're still being put up on the CoCo TV channel on Roku, which, of course, is sponsored by Roger Taylor. So check yourself. If they're not up to date, then go ahead and poke Roger, but you can come and check us out there. The CoCo Crew Podcast is a member of the Throwback Network. This is a list of retro-themed podcasts centered around the 80s. 80s culture, 80s technology. There's a mix of retro computing, arcade, video game stuff, and just some other general 80s stuff there. So if you're looking for another way to consume, or another podcast to consume once you're done with the CoCo Crew Podcast, then we recommend you check out the Throwback Network. We are also listed on the Game by Game Podcast Information Hub. This is also a listing of similarly themed podcasts. In this case, the central theme is video games and home computers. So you won't find the Greatest American Hero or anything like that unless he's in a video game on the Game by Game Podcast Information Hub, but you may find some other retro technology themed podcasts. So again, if you're looking for another podcast, we recommend you check it out. Audio for the CoCo Crew Podcast is hosted by Cyber Ears. If you have a need to host audio on the internet, whether it be for your business or your church or your hobby, maybe your own podcast, then we recommend that you check out Cyber Ears, where you will get your audio on your terms. Not sure what that means, but they're cool slogans, so you can definitely check them out. If you do want to reach out and contact the host of the CoCo Crew Podcast, we have some email addresses set up. I know we're old school email, just old people, just the Gen X people and above like email. Everybody younger doesn't seem to like email, but let's be realistic about our audience, right? So anyway, we have some addresses that will reach all of the hosts. These are show, SHOW, at CoCoCrew.org. That's CoCoCrew.org. We also have podcast, PODCAST, and feedback, FEEDBACK, at CoCoCrew.org. So any of those three email addresses will reach all the hosts. If you want to reach just one of the hosts, then you can feel free to reach out to us individually. I'm available as John, JOHN, at CoCoCrew.org. Neil is available as Neil, NEIL. Mike is available as Mike, MIKE. Boise is available as Boise. Now, I'm going to be slow on this one. BOISY at CoCoCrew.org.
Very good.
For some reason, that one gets messed up a little bit.
All the time.
And the one no one would ever misspell, Ron, RON, at CoCoCrew.org. Anyway, if you want to reach out and talk to one of us, feel free to send some email. All right, that's pretty much our standard announcements. I've got one that's not an event, that's a little bit different. The reminder, of course, was actually posted by D. Bruce Moore on the CoCo Facebook group. Anyway, every year the Glenside Color Computer Club has elections for its officers. For those that you don't remember, I am currently the president of Glenside. Tony Pedraza is the vice president. The secretary is Rich Bear. The treasurer is Brian Goers. These are the like I said, the officers of the club. We have some other members who also help with club activities like planning CoCo Fest. Anyway, if you want to have a say in who gets to be an officer of the Glenside, nominations should be happening at this month's meeting, which is the dates in front of me. I think it's the 12th, September 12th. Yeah, and the voting will close at the next month's meeting, October 10th. Last year we did the voting online. I assume we'll be doing the same thing this year, so you don't have to attend the meeting to vote, but you will have to log in probably through the tandylist.org site and be a member in good standing of Glenside, which basically means that you go to CoCo Fest in the recent year, and you'll be able to vote. So, anyway, if you want to have a say in who runs Glenside, then make your voice heard. All right, moving on to what's about some of the events coming up in real life that we think you might be interested in. Coming up September 14th and 15th of 2019, we have VCF, or Vintage Computer Festival Midwest. 14th edition of VCF Midwest will take place at Waterford Banquets Clarion Inn in Elmhurst, New Jersey, in conjunction with the Fall Commodore Expo ECCC. You may visit the Facebook page or ECCs to connect with us on social media, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, it's a good event. Lots of different elderly computers there, particularly from the 80s era, maybe some from the late 70s, maybe even a few from the early 90s. Anyway, it's a great event, centrally located in the United States. If you got a chance to get out there and you're interested in retro computers, it's definitely a good event to go to. So, Vintage Computer Festival Midwest, number 14, September 14th to 15th, 2019, in Elmhurst, Illinois. But if you can only make it out there every so often, out that direction, not too far away in Springfield, Ohio, on September 27th to the 29th, that's a Friday through a Sunday, there's a little event that we like to refer to here as Tandy Assembly, which of course is because that's its name. So let's see. This is, of course, our big Tandy event. It's not CoCo Fest, but it's the closest thing we got to this back half of the year. Also brings in the Z80 based Tandys, and for that matter, all the other Tandys, the Tandy 1000s and the Pocket computers and Model 100s. Lots of cool events there. Lots of cool activities there, shall we say. Lots of Radio Shack goodness. So I think several of us on the hosting staff here will be attending. I know at least Mr. Mike Rowan will be there.
Be there for sure.
I'll be there as well.
Same.
So I think that's all of us. So anyway, if you can make it out to Springfield, Ohio at the end of September, then we recommend you get there, come and meet us, talk to us, tell us all about your Tandy addiction. So again, that's Tandy Assembly, September 27th to 29th of 2019. All right, moving on. October 18th through 20th of 2019 in Portland, Oregon. So out in the Pacific Northwest part of the United States, held at the Oregon Convention Center. Portland Retro Gaming Expo. PRG is expanding in 2019, adding an additional 30,000 square feet. Total footage of 150,000 square feet. Arcades have been bursting at the seams, so they're going to put some of the games on the second floor. It's going to be a big event. I'm sure if you can make it out there, I've heard nothing but good things about this event, so if you can make it out there, I'm sure you'll enjoy it. If you do make it out there, feel free to give us some feedback, maybe record some interviews or something like that. Share it with us. That'd be great.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Anyway, that's October 18th to 20th of 2019, the Portland Retro Gaming Expo. Here's one that I've talked about once or twice before. I know it's because it's near my birthday. I ought to take off and just go do it, but probably again not this year, but someday maybe. November 22nd to the 24th of 2019, Free Play Florida, which is being held in Orlando, Florida. We've got pinball, enjoy the magic of the silver ball, all on free play, video games, an amazing collection of your favorite games, Yeah, including some rare gems you'll never play anywhere else. That's like stand-up arcade, consoles, one of the largest community collections of vintage computers and console systems in the Southeast. So it looks like a cool event. Got to check out the website. They got prices for their passes. Oh, they're going to have some interviews. They've got David Crane, Dan Kitchen, a few other folks I'm not sure I recognize, but maybe you will if you check it out. The link is in the show notes, so go check it out. Free Play Florida 2019, November 22nd through the 24th.
Florida's a good place to be in November.
Yeah, it is a good time to go to Florida, for sure.
To warm up.
Okay, and of course, it would be remiss if we didn't mention flipping around to the next year. We got April 18th and 19th of 2020, the 29th annual last Chicago CoCo Fest. You know, they call it the last because they never know if there's going to be another one. So I know Boise loves that one.
Look at that year, 2020. Think about that. Jeez.
Yeah.
Yep.
It'll be the 40th anniversary of the color computer. Big time to celebrate. Got a lot of TBDs on the website right now. Replacing the website might be another TBD if it was up to me. We'll see if that ever happens. Anyway, this is a big event in CoCo Land. This is an event that brought us all together. Still a favorite for us all, despite it all, shall we say. No, it's one of those, you sometimes you get a little miffed sometimes that people over things, but the ones you hold closest to your heart are the ones you have a little spaz with it. But anyway, CoCo Fest is a great event. We all enjoy it, and we'd love to see you come out. So not too late to start planning, definitely. You got 8 months. Start putting your money back. Don't want to hear your I didn't plan for it excuse come next April. And there'll always be a bunch of people say, oh, I wish I had been prepared. I wish I had planned and made reservations and put money back or whatever. Well, don't be that guy. Put your money back now. Come and join us for CoCo Fest this April. That'll be April 18th and 19th, held at the Holiday Inn in Elk Grove Village, Illinois. So I wanted to say the Heron Point Convention Center, but that's the old place. Maybe we'll arrange to have a heron there somehow. Boise, can you bring your pet heron?
Be glad to. Wait, I think it's right here.
Exactly. Anyway, well, there's our announcements for this month. I hope you all got some good information there. If not, I've just wasted my time. But anyway, we're going to move on. We're going to take another little break here, and then we'll be back with some news.
Hey, what's put a smile on your face this morning?
Oh, it's my Fred.
Fred? From accounting?
No, you idiot. Fred, F-R-E-H-D. It's a hard drive emulator for the TRS-80. It emulates the original Tandy hard disk drive, but stores everything on an SD card.
Oh, I see.
I ran programs that I hadn't touched in years because running them from floppy disk was just so painful.
More painful than Fred from accounting?
Shut up. For information and pricing, contact Ian Maverick via email, ianm@trs-80.com.
And we're back. Welcome back, CoCo Cruisers. Now it's time for some news. See, who's going to start us off this time? I think Myro's going to start us off this time.
All right, our first news item is Space Rescue by Matt Rutter from Softside, and this is for the MC-10 by Jim Gary. And this is pretty cool. This is it's from Softside Magazine, and he adapted it to the MC-10. It looks pretty cool. This is very similar to the video game Lunar Rescue, the arcade game. So your space, your mothership moves across the top, and you have to drop down and avoid the meteors and get down and rescue people. You have to rescue like 6 people, and then you have to navigate back up, and you can shoot the asteroids up there. So it's a great game, fun game. Definitely should check it out.
Cool.
All right, the next one comes from Per Surratt, the AGD source files. And he has posted the source files that he's using to convert games, the AGD games. And looks like it's written in C, but he's attached the source files that contain the whole data to compile a game. There's tiles, sprites, objects, etc. So definitely cool and worth checking out. It's great that he made that available to people. So if you're interested in converting games, then you definitely should check this out.
Yeah, those look pretty cool.
So thanks, Per. All right, our next one is from Vintage Teardown, and this is a teardown of the Motorola MC6847P video display generator. That's of course the video display generator that's used in the color computer. This is pretty cool because it's actually got pictures of the actual chip level. It's that kind of a teardown, but it shows you all the circuitry and the pins, and it's a cool description of it. What do you think, John?
Yeah, it looks pretty cool.
There's lots of photos of the die, so it's that level of the teardown and the data sheet. And it's kind of
like geek porn,
Yeah, definitely is. So it's not a long.
So it's cool to look at all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, it is cool. So definitely worth checking out. Okay, this next one is from Eric Canales. Glenside Disc of the Month floppies. I guess he has copies of the Disc of the Month floppies that the club put out from January of 92 to September of 96. And he's imaging them and he's going to upload them. I'm not sure where he's uploading them, hopefully to the Color Computer Archive. Doesn't say for sure, but you can look for those and you can always check in with Eric on Facebook.
Yeah, I think it's supposed to be to the Color Computer Archive, and I think he may have had trouble with one of the floppies. I don't know. I should check. I actually bought I think they had 2 copies of these. I actually bought the club's other copy at CoCo Fest last year, so I should probably check for that. See if I've got a readable version of the one he's missing.
So that's news to me. I didn't realize Glenside had a disc aspect to the club back in 92 to 96.
Yeah, I can't say I really was either.
Yeah, I didn't know about it either.
Interesting.
Back when they were more of a local club, I guess.
Yeah. Well, they were sponsoring the CoCo Fest at that time as well, so I just don't remember that aspect of it.
All right, our next item is from Simon Jonason. So here we have 4 voices with shaping, and this is pretty cool. He's got it out on Facebook, and you can play the demo he's got. If you've followed any of Simon's work, he's been able to do multi-voice just using the CoCo, raw CPU, and has done all kinds of tricks and multi-voices. And this time, he was even commented himself that his 3-voice player sounded like a flock of angry robots, probably because it was all square waves. So he's done some work to actually shape, give some shape to the different waveforms to make some interesting sounds. Plus, he's got some good deep tunes, but definitely check out his video. It sounds really nice. Big difference from his original 3-voice player. So good job, Simon, and it's great.
Yeah, definitely good. That was cool, and like I said, the Sawtooth. I've heard somebody say something, you either love it or hate it. It has kind of a gritty sound to it, and some people do enjoy it. It fits certain songs or whatever better than others. Personally, I do like this version of the player a little better. It sounds a little nicer to my ears. So it was a matter of taste, I guess. But yeah, it's cool to see a slightly different version come out from Simon. He does a lot of variations on this for kind of a tune everything to the specific task. It's kind of his style.
Yeah, very cool. All right, our next link is called GB Fourth. I would assume that's Game Boy Fourth. Using Fourth to understand the Game Boy. This was pretty much over my head.
But yeah, so it's a cool talk. It's not really CoCo related, of course, but it is a bit of a contemporary system. And And, we talk about Forth a lot on this podcast as well. So those of you who are Forth heads might enjoy watching and seeing where they talk about how they ported Forth over to the system. And they'll put in, kind of a serial emulation layer or whatever so they could interact with it textually. Talking about how the system works and, what they were able to do with it using Forth. It's pretty cool. Oh, you might want to check it out. Also, a plug for FOSDEM, which is an open source conference. Okay.
I was wondering what that was. That's cool. All right, I'm up next. Wouldn't be a perfect start if it wasn't a news article from Jim Gary. I got a new game here, Shop Steward by S.N. Goodwin. This looks to be, from what I was reading here, it's a port of an Apple II game. Got it ported to the MC10 here. Yeah, it's a relation simulation type-in program. Yeah, it looks really cool if you're into these kind of games. It's pretty detailed here.
Yeah. Jim definitely spans a broad spectrum of things with the software reports and, the audiences he's appealing to with them. Pretty cool.
Yeah, it's good range, good variety of games. Wonder how long it takes him to do each port, roughly. I know each game would be different, but, on an average.
Well, he definitely, I think he must be running some of these, multiple ones at a time. I mean, he certainly is constantly releasing things every week or two. We should have him on sometime for an interview and talk about, his process. Sometimes his video releases or updates or whatever. It's not always clear if they're new games or updates or whatever. So, it might not taking any shots at Jim, but it may not be quite as prolific as it looks like just from the number of mentions, but obviously he's still very active.
Oh, yeah, for sure. All right, our next news article is from Jenny List at Hackaday. This is Retro Tech-tacular, the floppy disk orphaned by Linux. Now, this one here, it got me. And I think the first thing it is, I messaged you, John?
Yeah. And, the floppy disk has been orphaned by reality in most ways, and there might be a few more systems still out there. I mean, we hear about how the missile silos still take 8-inch floppy disks or whatever. There might be a CNC machine or something like that out there with taking some floppy disks these days, but realistically, not many floppy disks are actually in use anyway. But so in this case, what does orphaned mean? Well, so if you're working on the Linux kernel, different parts of the kernel typically have people who concentrate on those specific parts. And so just to shorten it up a bit, those people are referred to as maintainers. They don't necessarily write all the code, but they're supposed to be responsible for accepting changes or managing changes to those areas and, making sure that if there's multiple people trying to change stuff, that they don't conflict with each other or resolve any kind of conflicts, that sort of thing. So the big news story here is that the floppy driver in Linux went from having a maintainer to not having a maintainer. And the main reason that was is because the person who was the maintainer apparently no longer has floppy disk drives that they can actually test anything with. And so it's not really realistic to maintain code if you can't code that operates hardware if you can't operate the hardware, right? So this doesn't mean that the floppy disk driver has disappeared from Linux, at least not the last time I checked. It just means it's not being actively developed or even maintained. Any code changes that hit it will be like accidental things, like when certain API changes or go and they have to change a function call everywhere it's used within the kernel, that sort of thing. Now, it's not great news for the floppy driver, but it is still there for somebody who wants to kind of take over, could come in. And I actually looked into that myself a little bit, but typically you need to actually work on the code legitimately before you become the maintainer. And I haven't found the opportunity to actually work on the code yet. So If I do find that opportunity, I might try to make a play to be the new floppy maintainer. I'm still known someone within the community as someone who plays with old computers, so I'd probably be a likely candidate if I wanted to reach out. But again, I need to find some projects that actually fix some bugs or something like that.
Now, the USB floppies will still work. The external drive.
Oh, yeah. I'm not even sure how much those interact with the floppy driver code per se anyway. I think they mostly look like ID hard drives, right? Or USB. They look like SCSI hard drives is what they look like.
Well, it's not on a real floppy controller.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there might be some interaction that just because there might be some floppy behavior or whatever that's still handled by the floppy driver for those. I'm not sure. Again, that's why I probably shouldn't be the floppy maintainer until I learn a bit more about that.
All right. Well, our next news article is from Oscar Toledo Gutierrez. I really hope I'm...
Gutierrez.
Yeah, that's a tough one for me. Anyways, this is a really cool one. It's Boot Basic Interpreter in 512 bytes.
Yeah, basically a boot block on a hard drive, and that 512 bytes. And the ROMs on a PC or whatever, they load that boot block off the disk and execute it. And instead of being code that loads up the rest of your operating system, in this case, it's just a basic interpreter. Probably fast as can be, I would imagine. But yeah, he has a couple other things. In fact, I think he's got a self-published book out there available on Lulu that covers Boot Basic and some of his other kind of quirky projects. I've got one on order. I hadn't got it yet, but it's pretty cool, neat personality out there. And it's not exactly a retro project. It kind of is because it's basic and it's resource constrained or whatever. I don't know. It is what it is. Take a look, see if you enjoy it.
All right, our next news article is from Sheldon McDonald. Watch my QMIDI Studio demonstration. Now, Sheldon, you're probably a big fan of him now. He's doing a lot of GMC stuff, it looks like, here.
Yeah, he's the guy that's got the... In fact, he's just ordered some more. I need to send off the PCBs to him. He's got some GMC PCBs, and he's been doing some... he designed the 3D printed cartridge case, and... been doing some software, working with the SN76489 sound generator chip. He's the one with the where he taps the audio output and runs it back into the cassette port so that you can just do audio on and audio off instead of having to do the specific pokes to enable the cartridge audio.
I remember that.
Yeah, so doing some cool stuff, and I'm glad somebody's having some fun. Not exactly my vision for the hardware, but it doesn't have to be. Right? As long as somebody's having fun with it.
Yeah, that's cool. He's always doing something with it. He's definitely working with it.
Yep.
All right, our next news article is from Brian Weisler. This is a Facebook post. It caught my eye. He posted, at the Home Depot, they carry this tub. And basically, it's a big plastic storage bin, and he's got a bunch of CoCos lined up in it. And it fits CoCos perfectly. I like this post because, I'm always trying to organize my collection here. I think it's probably an ongoing battle with all of us. But it was neat to see.
Yeah. Yeah, and I noted it because, he does identify the tub, and it does appear to fit the CoCo 2s at least pretty much perfectly. Probably CoCo 3 as well. Yeah. And so if you have a stack of them, it might be nice to put them in that plastic bin or a couple of them, and, you don't have to guess and you don't have wasted space.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's great. All right, my next news article here is from Nick Marentes out in Australia. Got a new blog entry on his Gunstar game he's coding. It's Chapter 19, Level 2. It's good to see he's got progress, and the game is still coming through.
Yeah, he's making progress. Looks like his second level's out in space, if I recall. So his first level was, over the cityscape or whatever. And, I don't know how much difference that makes in terms of the actual, the engine of the code, but designing levels is a thing too, right? So he's making some progress there.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, the video is pretty cool. I like how he's got the where you have to get the code.
Oh yeah,
the code bit. So yeah, definitely worth watching the video.
That's kind of a signature thing for Nick, I guess, because he had that in the what was the name of the Doom-like
Gatecrasher, yeah.
Gatecrasher, yeah.
Gatecrasher. Yeah, you had to do a code there to open the doors. So anyway, it seems to be one of his signature design points, I guess, is having a code. All right. Well, anyway, Ron, I think you're up.
I am. All right. Another news item from Jim Gary. He wrote a game about my basement called Dungeon of Death. Actually, I think it's referred to that by other people. Anyway, it's actually a cool game ported from the Commodore PET. It's like a loosely based on like a rogue NetHack type of game. Another great one for the MC10. Actually, I was playing with this one earlier. So, Jim, great job on that. Our next news item is tantalum capacitor replacement. I read the article on this. It looks like IBM on some of their 5100 series motherboards used a capacitor with 3 legs. Looks like some of them had double positive polarity, a single negative, or 2 negatives and a positive for polarity. So you had 3 holes in the PCB. Looks like you can replace it with a 2-legged version of that, and they're kind of talking about how you can do that.
Yeah, that's why I included it. Is because of I'd never seen that, and I thought maybe some other people would not have seen those 3-legged capacitors either. So
no, I didn't. This is the first time after reading the article. So okay, our next news item is from Alex Proudfoot. Welcome to the Learning ZIL Wiki, or the Zork implementation language. For those of you that have listened to this podcast for a while, John did a great segment back in November of 2017. I think that was episode 30 of the Zork engine and how it came to be for the CoCo and things like that. There was a great interview at the time. This is kind of another article about it. It seems like we're hearing more and more about these Zork-style games and the interactive fiction, and people wanting to write because they can hack the engine and things now. They can add their own fiction in there. So it's a good article, a little bit lengthy, the wiki, but for anyone that's interested in this type of thing, it's a great resource to go to. Our next news item is from Rick Bagwell. I thought this was interesting. I'd never heard of this. A multi-pack interface. Well, he references the 26-3024 part number with Marty Goodman's PAL Selector daughter board. So I didn't know they had anything like this. I was under the assumption that if you upgraded a multi-pack with the PAL upgrade to be compatible with the CoCo 3, you were okay using it with a CoCo 2. It seems like maybe there's some incompatibilities with a couple cartridges, so this will kind of get around that. I don't know if anyone else has done any.
Yeah. Well, so I think the thing is that there's certain cartridges that are addressed to where they actually conflict. Basically, they conflict, well, possibly either with the registers on the multi-pack or maybe the registers that are on the gimme. And so, something about it, once you modify the PAL to work with the CoCo 3, then even though those cartridges would have worked on that MPI on a CoCo 2, that wasn't modified, now they won't because of the modifications made to support the CoCo 3. It's only like 1 or 2 cartridges, I think, but I don't know. Anyway, I thought it was interesting. If nothing else, maybe historically, who knows? Maybe we can talk one of our budding hardware gurus into replicating it or whatever. But
you never know. There may be some interest in it. Who knows?
Yeah, I know Wheel Talker was one of the cartridges that was impacted because it just was in that sweet spot where the address Justice change with the new PAL.
Wonder if Tim Linder does Tim Linder have one of those cartridges? Real Talker? Well, maybe if I see him at TA. I don't think he goes to Tandy Assembly. May have to wait till CoCo Fest.
Yeah, it's also amazing how the stuff always turns up in the rainbow. What a good resource it still is. Every time you turn around, it's like, I never knew that article existed.
Yeah, definitely.
It is a great resource, absolutely. Okay, our next item is from Chris Kohler at Cockatoo. Deep-pocketed collectors are fueling a retro game gold rush. Geez, anybody that collects vintage game cartridges and things like that on eBay or whatever, they see the prices on this stuff, and it's not just the retro games, it's everything. We know we're all in this hobby. Some of us branch out into other things. It's a really good article. I'll tell you, the money that they're talking about in here is well beyond what my budget has, but it just goes to show you, how serious some of these collectors are. I mean, back in the day, I used to collect comic books and things like that. There's even some reference to that in here. So for those of you that are into cartridge collecting, I know we're all big fans of cartridges here on the show, obviously, but this extends to a lot of other game systems and things like that. So, good article.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, this is another one of those articles where somebody's kind of whining that other people got here first and got all the cool stuff and now won't sell it to them for cheap prices. But there might be some legitimate stuff there when you have people who come in just to collect to the point of hoarding. If they get their way and hoard all the really rare stuff or the really interesting stuff, what is that really doing for the world? Is it making the world a better place? I don't know. I don't know if it's really a problem. It might be a problem in some places or some cases.
Well, for the people that want to play this stuff, you're right. If it gets hoarded, we see that with other things too. So yeah, I see that side of it as well. All right, and our next item is from Emerson Costa, MC6847 version of 10 print. It looks like a one-liner that generates a maze. It looks like it came from the the VZ2000 or the 200, the laser systems. Somebody had posted this on Facebook, and now it's been adapted to run. Of course, Jim Gary has made a version that will work on an MC10, though with a slightly different slant in some cases. Yeah, and then he did another one that looks like it would just run indefinitely. He had it looping. And it also looks like somebody added some colors here. And it looks like it's just using some semi-graphic characters out of the 6847.
Yeah. So there's a book written by Ian Bogus, or is it? Might be Ian. Anyway, it's either him or his partner. It's based on the program that was from the Commodore 64 that I guess was originally published in one of their magazines, their version of the Rainbow or whatever. And basically a one-liner that would use a print routine in a random number and print basically either a left or a right slash, a forward or back slash. And the effect is it would fill the screen with what looked like a random maze. And the book, it kind of gets a little thick or a little deep in some ways, talking about, kind of the cultural or philosophical or psychological aspects of this, dumb little program. And it implements the program on a few different systems, including the CoCo, but like the CoCo version, the slashes and so don't quite line up the same. The font itself doesn't quite look the same, and so it doesn't look as cool on the CoCo as it does on the Commodore. These implementations with the semi-graphics or whatever actually kind of look cooler. Also, not exactly the same, but maybe closer in some ways to the spirit of what the program's supposed to be. And if we're going to get all metaphysical or whatever, then we need to really honor the spiritual aspects, don't you think? Boise, I think you're up.
The next news item is Square Force Alpha by our good friend, Mr. Jim Gary. This is a video on YouTube of a game that Jim is working on, and it looks like a clone of a game called Tank Battalion.
Cool. Well, it's always good to see more games from Jim.
All right, the next news item is Strange Odyssey. For the TRS-80 color computer, a Scott Adams Grand Adventure number 6. The full solution by Noriko Miyagami. This is also a YouTube video. It looks like Noriko is going through the entire adventure game, doing the solution screen by screen, and it's about a 21-minute video, so she is going through and taking her time, showing you what to type, what to do to get through the game. It's pretty instructive if you want to solve it. And again, this is a game, it looks like, from Scott Adams' Adventures from back in the day.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And Noriko's been publishing these game solutions, and it seems like a perhaps surprisingly large audience of people that are interested in those walkthroughs on adventure games.
This is sort of like the trend nowadays for people to play games online, shoot 'em up games or other kind of action games, and except you're watching someone solve an adventure game. It's a pretty cool idea.
Mm-hmm.
All right. The next news item is the last working Olivetti mainframe sits in a Tuscan high school by Jean Kumagawa. Kumagawi. IEEE Spectrum. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing the name. So this is a mainframe that's sitting in a high school in, I'm not exactly sure, somewhere in Europe.
Italy, I believe, yeah.
Italy, okay, yep. This is interesting because it looks like, reading the article, they actually still have people, actually former Olivetti employees, periodically travel to this high school to tend to the machine. That's really cool.
Yeah, I just thought that was cool from just a retro computing perspective. To think that it's still sitting out there somewhere, and it has those, like you said, those employees are still dedicated to former employees, still dedicated to keeping the machine going or whatever. That's really cool.
That's some serious dedication. I like that. I wish my high school had that kind of forward thinking.
Yeah.
I like the quote in there. I like the quote in there said, "If you don't run the computer regularly, it'll stop working. If you move it, it will die."
Love it. Oh, for the old days. Anyway, the next news item is, hey, what's going on here? Timing differences, significant, between PAL CoCo models by Richard Atkinson. So this is not showing up for me on Facebook, John. I'm not able to see it. I don't know if the post was removed, but can you delve in a little bit to what this was?
Yeah, so basically he's dealing with Dragonfire, a game. Some people think more of it than others, but it's not a bad game, I guess. But it's interesting and notable because it's the only CoCo game I know of, actually, from back in the day, that does any kind of time-based video effects, and so it actually changes the color sets or whatever to get 8 colors on one of the graphics screens. So when it shows the castle and the bridge or whatever, there's different parts of the screen are in different color sets. This is sort of what inspired me to do what became my VDG Tricks blog and Sluzzle and all that. But so anyway, those the timing there is obviously tied to the television system, and in particular tied to NTSC, because I don't think there was a PAL version originally published. There is a PAL version out there where someone has done some hacking and kind of hacked that model, hacked that code. But the gist of this article is that if you, I think you're using the original unhacked version, and you get, understandably, you get some deviation of the effects. The graphics don't look quite right running the NTSC code on a PAL machine. But the interesting part is you running different PAL machines, you get different displays from each other. So implying that some of the PAL motherboards may have some differences in the design that actually manifest in different timings for the video output. I don't think anybody's dug too deeply into it yet, but it's interesting. Maybe it's not interesting to everybody, but it's kind of interesting anyway.
Yeah, you would think you'd want to have consistency, or you would have consistency between, different CoCos of the same model. That's an interesting problem to contemplate. All right, the next article is Radio Shack Reboot. Retailer powers up with new vision by Maurice Richer at the Fort Worth Business Press. So this article is interesting. This is about a store in Keller, Texas, a Radio Shack store. It is independently owned, but it is not partnered with any other type of franchise like Sprint. This is a standalone Radio Shack store that is set up as a model, it appears, for what other Radio Shack stores may be like in the future. So this is a great example of Radio Shack just not ready to give up the ghost yet.
All right. Yeah, that's really cool that they're actually fighting to try to bring it to kind of keep that thing alive and adapt to modern realities and whatever. But I don't know, I definitely have I'm rooting for them. Hope to see that succeed.
Yeah, definitely.
It's it's really cool to see that they still have staying power. So more power to them.
Mm-hmm.
All right. The next news item is I've completed scanning, processing, and uploading the entire Dynamic Color News magazine by Carlos Camacho. So this is a post on the CoCo multimedia list. Carlos has, with the help of, I think, Steve Ostrom, who provided the magazines to scan, has scanned the entire Dynamic Color News magazine. Kudos to Carlos for doing that. I love when people preserve old material like this. I have to admit, I remember vaguely back in the day seeing an ad in the Rainbow for Dynamic Color News. I thought it was like more of a newsletter format than a real, like a magazine, but I could be wrong. But this is good stuff. It was a resource. I don't know how many years it went. I don't know what the span was. But again, thanks to Carlos for doing the work in scanning and making that available in the CoCo archives.
Yeah, it looks like it was from 84 to 89.
Okay.
So good stretch.
Yeah, that's 6 years, something like that. That's pretty good. So.
It's amazing how many of these little, smaller newsletter magazines, whatever, dedicated to specific computers, particularly to the CoCo, existed back in that time, and how many of them produced pretty decent content. I was looking on archive.org today and saw a number of different titles, different magazines or newsletters or whatever. Probably a dozen.
Yeah,
it's just kind of crazy to think that there were that many out there.
Yeah, I'm looking over the issues on colorcomputerarchive.com, and like I said, I do remember seeing an advertisement for this in the Rainbow magazine. But you're right. I mean, you have Dynamic Color News, you had CoCo Clipboard, you had Color Computer Magazine. It was a lot of information, a lot of enthusiasts kind of doing their own thing, and kind of regret not back in the day subscribing to all of these, but now we have them up on the internet free for everyone to use. It's great.
Yeah. Well, if I had subscribed to them, it just would have been a section of the local landfill that would be inaccessible because I would have thrown them away when I was 23 or something, But
yeah, exactly.
It's cool that we can have them today. I'm glad not everybody threw them away.
That's right. All
right. Well, let's see. Moving on. We've got one more Jim Gary creation to talk about. This is, he calls Breakout. And he says, I've modified Tandy's breakout using my various speed-up techniques. Also changed the way key input is handled. The paddle now moves faster, but you can make little adjustments if you just tap lightly. I assume he means short periods, not actually lightly, because you probably can't tell the difference between a light tap and a hard tap. But they have called the resulting program Breakout in honor of Woz's classic. So anyway, pretty cool. It looks, pretty familiar in terms of the appearance. If you're familiar with the Breakout game that he's based this on, which I think was it a type-in program in like one of the basic books or something? I think so. Or is this based? It's not based on a cartridge, surely. Anyway, so pretty cool. It's publishing another game, and I'm always happy to see these and cover them from Jim. So I thought it'd be funny to have each of us have a Jim Gary game to cover this month. So there you go. So thanks, Jim. Good job. All right, moving on. So we've got a couple of links that are related, though. They're from Chet Simpson. And so he says, basically says he's been kind of busy over the summer, but he's doing some work with MySQL, which is a database program. And he's got the archives of the old Delphi CoCo forum, and is basically massaging them to make them available for those who want to re-experience the past in real time, so to speak. And we want to check the show notes and read his actual posting. There's a lot to cover, and just kind of skimming it here. But he's got a couple of them, because the second one that comes along says, so basically the first one says, I've got this and it's coming. And then the second one says, yeah, it was coming, now it's here. But so he's got, like I said, a database available based on the old Delphi CoCo Sig archives. And so if you want to look back and see what people were talking about in 1989 or whatever related to the CoCo, here it is. Come check it out. So very cool. Thank you, Chet. All right. Moving on. Got a post here from Ed Snyder. Of course, Ed, Ed's been producing some hardware for the CoCo, particularly the CoCo STC, which has been very popular. Did some, composite video upgrades for the MC10 and the CoCo 2s. Has been working with Brendan Donahue on the CoCo VGA, but, one of his notable things is he's been doing multi-pack replacements for a while. He's had the 2-slot multi-pack replacement, and more recently he's had the 4-slot multi-pack replacement, but it's not just 4 slots. It also includes stereo ports and a OPL chip. I think it's OPL 3, whatever the Sound Blaster had. And so anyway, OPL 3's it's not. I don't know how terribly complicated it is to program. It's not as easy as some other chips. It uses FM synthesis, so it's a little bit different technology. Kind of thing. Not everybody's going to be able to master it, kind of just with the bare metal. But so he's pointing out you can use this tracker program called OpenMPT and output data that you can then use the data to drive the OPL3 chip. I think that's what his video is showing here. So if you have the Mega Mini MPI, the 4-port MPI replacement from Ed, and a few people do, then if you're looking to create tunes to play on the OPL chip there, this is one way you might be able to go about it. So if that describes you, then check out Ed's video here, OpenMPT OPL chip tunes. So good luck. All right. Moving on. Here's a kind of a random one from the Sim Language Programming Motor Idle 6809, 6309, 6800 microprocessors, a Facebook group, which is a little bit of an odd collection. But anyway, it's from someone named James Russell. He says, for those who are struggling to get a 6809/6309 circuit to start or run it, or at high clock rates, please read on. Problem may be due to bus timing. Basically says books on the 6809 tend to gloss over use of the Q clock. Which is true. So there's basically 2 phases of the clocking on the 6809. There's a It's called a Q clock and the E clock. Typically, I guess the Q clock is quadrature, and E is typically, I think, used as an enable. So usually you gate off the E signal for some of the bus accesses. It sounds like technically you really need to have both E and Q high at the same time. And he recommends a book, Microtechnology, the 6809 by P.J. Thewlis. I have no idea if that's pronounced correctly or not, but check out his link in the show notes. And it's got, actually, I think he has a picture of the book in here too. I have one on order now, so hopefully they'll come soon.
I'm ordering one too.
Yeah.
Article. I've been working with some interfacing, so
cool.
It's interesting that would. I can see where that would affect it at high speeds.
Yeah, definitely. At the higher speeds, you probably need more precise stuff. So it probably works out just fine for most people at the lower speeds to just use E. I'm sure, in fact, I know it works out just fine from all the stuff I've been doing.
I think anything on the CoCo with the E would be sufficient.
Yeah. But so anyway, if you do have a problem, I know a while back, I know Kip Kuhn had a 6809 board that he had a lot of trouble getting to run. So could be he's violating whatever this principle is here. I don't know. Of course, I think he has some other problems, but maybe he figured his out. Anyway, sorry for that random drive-by, Kip. Anyway, moving on. So here's kind of a cool video on YouTube from a company called PCBWay. It's how PCB is made in China, PCBWay factory tour. And so this basically is a video with a tour of almost like a how it's made video, if you're familiar with that cable series, but showing how circuit boards are created in the PCBWay factory, which is probably similar to basically any similar factory, at least certain ones that are servicing the hobby market and even the most professional markets. It would probably be similar as well. Pretty cool video. It's about 13 minutes long. I enjoyed it. For what it's worth, PCB is a service I've been using. So if you get a Game Master cartridge, or I think it's a service that Neil may have been using for the joypad adapters. Yep. So if you want to see where your Farfall cartridge was actually etched, you may want to check it out. So very cool. All right. The final item here, it's got my name on it, and it's just an announcement, and it's a point of pride. So we've been making this podcast for just over 4 years now. Like I said, this is the 51st episode, a monthly episode, so just a bit over 4 years. I'm happy to announce that we can comfortably document 100,000 episode downloads. So if you downloaded every episode, that'd be 51 downloads. Is the way I'm counting them here. So every episode you download, that's another download for the count. So point being, I think that's a pretty good number. That's a pretty good achievement.
It's awesome.
Pretty strong. Roughly, a couple of thousand average for every episode. Not too bad for Tandy's little underdog computer 30 years later, 40 years later. I'm pretty happy about that. Pretty proud that we've been able to put together something that people find entertaining enough to do those downloads. For reasons, we have lost some of our statistics on some of our earlier episodes. So I suspect we probably crossed the 100,000 line a couple of months back, but I couldn't document it, so I didn't want to claim it. But now I can document it with statistics that we actually have in hand. So, so there you go, 100,000 downloads. Very exciting.
Congratulations to us.
Yeah, exactly. Very cool. All right. Well, those are our announcements. That's our news for this month. So we're going to take another little break, and then we'll be back. with some feedback.
So you just purchased a TRS-80 Model 1 on the internet?
Yeah, it's going to be great. It was my very first computer.
So did you get a tape player and cassette cable?
No.
How about an expansion interface so you can have more RAM and disk drives?
No.
How about actual 5 1/4-inch floppy drives?
No.
You're not going to be able to do much with your TRS-80 Model 1.
No, I guess I have a lot more purchases to make on the internet.
It's probably going to take a lot more time and money to gather all of those other components, especially when you can't be sure they'll even work until you receive them.
Yeah.
Don't worry. For about the same price as all of those items, you can purchase the Model 1 System Expander from Bartlett Labs.
Yeah?
The M1 SE allows you to boot directly into LDOS and access hard drive images stored on compact flash.
Wow.
It also adds extras like an SVGA port, Ethernet, real-time clock, and joystick port. You can even move software directly from your PC to your TRS-80. You'll be enjoying the entire catalog of TRS-80 software in a flash.
Where can I get one?
Just go to bartlettlabs.com for details and pricing.
Thanks.
Bartlett Labs, making your TRS-80 what it was meant to be.
All right, CoCo Cruisers. I know you've all been blowing your party horns and wearing your party hats since that 100,000 download announcement. But we're going to get back and talk about some feedback. So here we go. First item comes from Paulo Garcia. It's a nice fellow. He says to us, congratulations to you and all the CoCo hosts. It was always a great show that I look forward to every month. So thank you, Paulo. It's great to have enthusiastic listeners and good supporters. And we otherwise we're just talking to ourselves, and we could do that without all the trouble of editing if it wasn't for the audience, right? So good to know we've got audience out there and that are cheering us on and happy to hear what we're providing. Thank you for letting us know, Paulo. Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
All right, the next item comes from Carlos Camacho. Carlos says, I found Boise's segment on a past Rainbow Fest very interesting. I'd go as far to say the best segment in some time. So congratulations, Boise. That's for me. I think it's vital to archive such CoCo history so that those who might join the community someday can look back at the roots. I hope to hear more historical stories. So, very good feedback for our CoCo historian. I hope you can cinch up your bow tie and look regal and going to get you a walking stick with a big silver handle or something to
might bring
your outfit.
Yeah, I might bring a top hat and a white cane with some gloves.
Exactly, some gloves would be great. Anyway. Very good. Thank you, Carlos. It's always good to have some feedback on the content and let us know what you like and don't like and that sort of thing. So, cool.
Yep. Thank you, Carlos.
All right. Our last item comes from Kevin Braun. And so this Kevin Braun is the fellow who sent me the music project box or whatever. He says, I was happy to hear in the latest episode that you appreciated getting something from a listener. And I'll mention in the email that he sent me, he said that when I mentioned that I'd gotten some flack about the music in Farfall in the past, he always cringed a little, hoping that I didn't consider his his musical gift to be some sort of insult on my composing ability or whatever. So, no, it was very nice to receive something from a listener, as long as it doesn't blow up when I open it. Or spread anthrax or something in the house. It's,
no Unabomber.
Yeah, exactly. As long as it doesn't do those things, I'm happy to receive any sort of tokens or gifts or whatever. And I'm sure probably our other hosts would appreciate some considerations as well.
Yeah, bring it up.
Especially if you'd like to send a keg or or a bottle of wine or something to Tandy Assembly for us all to enjoy. I'd be just a suggestion, just a thought.
That's a great idea.
Or a basket of maple.
Well, there you go. Or just a bunch of maple syrup. In fact, I know someone who might be sending something like that. A certain resident artist that we're all aware of. Anyway, cool. There's our feedback for this month. And so I think we're going to take another little break, and we'll be back with the rest of the show.
Does your CoCo 3 run hot? Are you using an older Model 512K RAM upgrade? Or maybe you have a 128K CoCo 3 that could use more memory. The Triad 512K memory board from Cloud9 is the solution you're looking for. Named for its unique triangular shape, the Triad only draws about 22 milliamps of current. That's an amazing 95% reduction in power. Less power means less heat and less stress on your Color Computer 3. The Triad 512K memory upgrade has been in production since 2013 with more than 500 units sold. So whether you need to upgrade to 512K or want to replace an older power-hungry memory board, the Cloud9 Triad is the proven, reliable 512K solution. Often copied, never duplicated. The Triad 512K upgrade from Cloud9. Cool stuff for your color computer. Visit cloud9tech.com for details.
Welcome to This Month in CoCo History, where we explore events in the life of our favorite home computer. I'm Boise Pete, and this month we step back 36 years in time to sift through the pages of the July 1983 issue of Color Computer magazine. On page 16, Dennis Kitts wrote a fascinating article entitled Custom Color, which detailed interfacing a 128K bubble memory board to the color computer. This 11-page pedagogical work explained everything from how bubble memory worked in theory to parts required for the board and interfacing to the CoCo. A black and white ad on pages 36 and 37 highlighted Nelson Software Systems' Super Color Library, a suite of productivity software for the CoCo that included Super Color Writer 2, Super Color Mailer, Super Color Speller, Super Color Calc, Super Color Terminal, Super Color Disk Zap, and Super Color Database. All of these programs amounted to what would be considered Microsoft Office for the color computer today. Pages 55 through 60 featured Jake Commander, who began the first in a series of articles entitled Dissecting Your ROM, which examined disassembled portions of the Color Basic ROM. And page 89 contained a full-page ad in black and red ink from Mark Data Products out of Mission Viejo, California, touting its catalog of CoCo action and adventure games, all written in, quote, fast, efficient machine language, end quote. Just circle number 63 on the reader service card for more information. Today, we have the Internet to deliver a constant stream of CoCo information and immediate connectivity to enthusiasts that we could only dream of 36 years ago. Today, we have the Internet to deliver a constant plethora of CoCo information and immediate connectivity to enthusiasts that we could only dream of 36 years ago. Yet there was something special about that one day every month when magazines like these would show up in our mailboxes.
Turn any color computer with Extended Basic into a complete disk system with the new FD501 Color Thin Line Disk from Radio Shack. Store over 156K of data, write your own disk programs, or use ready-to-run software. The disk operating system is built into the program pack cartridge that connects the disk drive to your color computer. And the FD501 has room to add a second drive, providing an additional 156K of storage. This month only, purchase a 2-drive FD501 Color Thin Line Disk System for just $359.95. That's a 25% savings. Apply in-store for a CityLine revolving account and pay as low as $20 per month. The FD501 Thin Line Disk. Only from Radio Shack, a Tandy company.
All right, welcome, CoCo Cruisers. This is John Linville, and I'm here with a tech segment for our episode 51. Wow, that sounds weird. Anyway, so this time I wanted to talk a bit about the file system used by Disk Extended Color Basic. And so what does that mean? So we all know, of course, Disk Extended Color Basic uses a diskette for storage. But in a sense, a diskette is just like a big bucket of bits, or maybe conceptually a number of somewhat smaller buckets of bits. The point being, there is some organization sort of enforced upon it by the disk format, the low-level format, and how by itself that doesn't give you much usefulness. So at the very least, you want to be able to have Well, I mean, at the very least, that can be useful. You could just write one file at a time just out to a diskette. And if it uses a whole diskette, that's fine. And then if it didn't use a whole diskette, just use another diskette for the next file. That would work. Be kind of wasteful. It's not all that different from how we used cassettes in many cases back in the day, although most people probably used more than one file on a cassette, depending on what they were doing. That actually can be or has been a reasonable backup strategy for particularly, I first saw it with Unix systems back in the day, where you could use the tar command, which is tar actually stands for tape archive, but instead of outputting the tar command to a tape, you could output it to a disk or one or more disks and actually write to the raw disks as a replacement for tape files. It doesn't get the full use out of the medium, so to speak, but it does the job. Anyway, that's a bit of a diversion. Not really what I meant to talk about. So, this is the CoCo Crew Podcast, so let's get back to talking a little bit more about the CoCos. And in this case, it's particularly Disk Extended Color Basic and the file system thereof. And I will note here that Dragon DOS uses its own different file system, rather different if I recall. I looked a little bit and I was hoping to find that say, oh, and they're similar in this way or that. They are, I mean, I think there's some similarities per se, but they're quite a bit different. So if I'm wrong about that, then maybe I just can't read English, but anyway, so Dragon folks, you may want to skip ahead unless you're just curious about what the CoCo is doing. Okay, so I'll start by saying that perhaps not surprisingly, the Disk Extended Color Basic file system is somewhat conceptually similar to the file system used by MS-DOS, at least the old versions of DOS. Somewhat more similar actually to the standalone Disk Basic that was available for like the 8080 based S100 systems and such. So it's not too surprising because both those systems come from Microsoft, right? So there's going to be at least some conceptual similarities. It's not exactly the same though. So in fact, not even super close, just somewhat similar. So if things start to sound like similar, that's great if it helps you understand, but don't think that you can actually exploit that in any meaningful way without doing some more extra research. All right, let's talk a little bit about the mechanics of a diskette. So diskettes, well, fundamentally they're just a big, it's a magnetized piece of plastic. And so what happens is they get a low-level format on them that actually, kind of imprints marks out units, fixed size units of storage that are essentially based on the mechanical characteristics of the disk drive. But along with that, that's sort of a mechanical concern. Let's see. Disk access, of course, is mechanical, it's relatively slow, and so when you're dealing with that in terms of a computer, which compared to the diskette, at least is a lot faster, even an old slow retro computer. If you're transferring data to and from this device, you tend to want to batch up that data for those transfers. But you typically don't batch it all up to do everything all at once either, because that's not always useful or practical for other constraints to the application, or just because you don't have enough memory or whatever. So you divide up your your device accesses into blocks of data. That's why you hear the term block storage even today, right? The size of these units have to be kind of picked to kind of balance out how much is useful, how many do you need to do, how fast does it need to go. Your best throughput would probably be a really large block units, but if you don't need really large accesses, then you're usually wasting space and that sort of thing. So you tend to work in what are called sectors, and you keep the sector sizes kind of small enough to be useful and large enough to be, economical with the access to the hardware. Turns out for the CoCo, we end up with 256 bytes for a sector. Just go ahead and throw that out there because I'm not sure where else I had it in the notes. One of the things that doesn't really come up in the file system stuff, I guess, but one thing that's worth noting, typically, because diskettes are rotating media, you might think that, if you had stuff broken down, so typically the diskettes are gonna be broken down into tracks, and each track, and so track is literally a ring around the media, and then the tracks will be broken down into sectors, which are essentially angular units, meaning with a certain rotational distance around the track, or rotational time around the track. So technically the sectors in the outside tracks are physically bigger than the sectors on the inside tracks, but in terms of time they pass under the same amount of time because it's rotating. So a little circle logic, so to speak. Anyway, when you access a sector, it takes a certain amount of time to access that, and then typically once you've read in a sector or written one out, you're going to want to do some kind of processing before you access the next sector. Well, the disk is going to continue to spin, so if you wanted to operate as people want to do, in a logically linear fashion, you want to read sector 1, then read sector 2, then read sector 3. Once you get finished reading sector 1, the next sector on the disk is already passing by before you can set up the next read. So sector 2 typically will not be, logical sector 2 will not be the next physical sector on the disk. This is called skip factor, which you probably have heard in different times. And I think, so I have to find it on here, but the skip factor for the disk extender called basic tends to be 4 sectors. So on disk, you'll put down the first sector. So the physical sector 1 will be logical sector 1. But then logical sector 2 doesn't come out until, instead of being physical sector 2, it actually isn't until physical sector 6. So 2 plus 4 is 6. Anyway, so they're not in the same linear order because of physical constraints of the medium. Again, it doesn't have a lot to do with the discussion of the file system, but sometimes it's worth discussing or worth knowing. And so I'll just go ahead and throw that out here. Anyway, where's David Ladd when you need him, huh? So as I was saying, the diskettes are logically kind of divided up into tracks and sides and sectors. These are physical aspects in a sense. So the sides are literally, top and bottom, or left and right, depending on how you want to look at it. But and the disk extender called basic, the disks are all one-sided anyway, so you don't worry about that. The original diskettes tend to use were single-sided diskettes because that's all that was really available. Later, double-sided diskettes became more common. There are some ways to use those double-sided diskettes by essentially treating each side as a different drive, we're not going to go into that here, but just you may want to keep that in mind for future projects or whatever, if for those of you who are still interested in using physical diskettes. Let's see, again, the cylinders. If you imagine a track, like track and field, and there's lanes marked out on the track, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever. Now, when the race starts, the runners all end up gravitating back down to the inner lane. So forget that part of it. Imagine if the runners stayed in the separate lanes. Then the lanes would be like a cylinder, or a track. Sorry. So the lanes would be a track. And then if you cut them up, depending on how far you run in each lane, that'd be like a sector. So some of you may have heard the terms cylinders, heads, and sectors used with regard to, particularly to hard drives. That was the old way before the what they call LBA, or logical block addressing. You used to have to specify in the BIOS how many cylinders your hard drive had, how many heads, how many sectors, whatever. Cylinders are essentially the same thing as tracks. Some documents seem to make a distinction between cylinders. So in a hard drive, you have more than one platter, which is almost like more than one parallel disk. And some of them make a big deal about cylinders being distinct from tracks. So the track is on a per disk basis, and then the tracks that are all vertically above one another, that corresponds to a cylinder. So the cylinder is the same track on every platter. I don't know, it's all nomenclature, right? Anyway, so if you've heard the term cylinders and heads, that would correspond. Cylinders correspond to tracks. Heads correspond to sides. On a floppy disk, you only have 2 sides at most, and then as far as extended color basic, disk extended color basic is concerned, you only have 1 side anyway. So disk extended color basic only, by default at least, only knows about 35 tracks, knows about 1 side. Each track is divided into 18 sectors per track. Which is then the sectors themselves will give you 256 bytes of data per sector. And then that's all pretty much physical stuff. Then the file system, for convenience of allocation, because if you count that out, there's already quite a number of sectors. The file system groups. It'll take 9 logical sectors per track. So 2 sets of them, 2 sets of 9 sectors per track. So 18 sectors per track divided into 2 groups, which he calls granules. And so the first 9 sectors in a track are grouped into 1 granule, and then the second 9 tracks are the second granule, and then you move on. So that's starting at track 0, and then track 1, you have granules 3 and 4, or I guess the granules are actually numbered from 0. So granule 0 is in tracks 1 through 9. I'm sorry, track 0, sectors 1 through 9. Granule 1 is track 0, sectors 10 through 18. Granule 2 is track 1, sectors 1 through 9. So granule 3 would be track 1, sectors 10 through 18, and then just keep counting them up from there. And so you end up with 35 tracks. I would say you would end up with 70 granules, but one of those tracks is reserved for directory usage or whatever. So you only have 34 data tracks on the disk, and so you end up counting the granules 0 through 68, and then one more complication is the non-data track is track 17, so it's right in the middle. So tracks 0 through 16 give you granules 0 to 30, 0 to 31, and then tracks 18 through 35 give you granules 32 through 68. Yeah, I think that's right. 30. No, it's just 35 through 68. So 0 through 34 on the first half of this. It gets confusing after a while. Anyway, just keep that in mind that you have to skip track 17 when you're converting between granules and tracks. So within track 17, you have sector 2 is used for what's called the file allocation table. The file allocation table is used to keep track of which granules are used in a given file. And so basically those are linked together in a chain. We'll talk about that in a second. Which granule to start with for a given file is something you have to get out from the directory. So track 17, sectors 3 through 11 are used for containing directory entries. And so that means in at least a normal 35 track diskette, sectors 1 and sectors 12 through 18 are actually unused. We'll get speculate about that a little bit at the end, but they're just unused. So in a normal system, whatever. You paid for disk space that you couldn't use, I guess. But we're all over it by now. Okay, so like I said, sector 2 is for what's called the file allocation table. A file allocation table is essentially just an array of bytes. The bytes are formed into chains as parts of the disk are allocated to a file. Allocations are done on a granule basis, so that's 9 sectors at a time or half a track at a time is allocated to a file. And so that's why even if a file with 1 byte in it, sometimes it takes up space. That's a little granules indicator you get when you do a dir. You can only have so many files on the disk, no matter how small they are. We'll get to that in a little bit as well. But that has to do with the granules. So anyway, if you look at the bytes themselves in the file allocation table, well, number one, you shouldn't see more than 68 of them as anything but hexadecimal FF or 255. The hexadecimal FF is unused, so freshly formatted diskettes file allocation table should just be full of FF. But wherever there's not an FF, that byte value, you look at it, if it's in the range of 0 to 67, then it's saying that there's more than one there's more than one track used, more than one granule used, and the number given there tells you which offset to look for to see if there's another granule used. And so let's say you look at the first byte and it has a 0, 1 in it. And then you look at the second byte, 0, 1 will be the next offset, and then there's a 0, 2 there. That would be 3 granules in a row. Eventually you're going to get to one that the first part is a C, a hexadecimal C, the top 2 bit set, and the 2 most significant bit set. And it'll be either C0 through C9, so 0 through 9 on the bottom half. And that tells you how many sectors are used within that last granule. And basically says that whatever it is, whatever granule number has a C whatever in it, is saying that's the last granule associated with this file. And then the last half of that byte is telling you how many sectors are actually used from that granule. Very clever, huh? So like I said, you should only see up to 68 bytes used out of the file allocation table because there's only 68 granules within a normal normally formatted file. Formatted diskette. Because again, that's going to be 34 data tracks and 2 granules per data track. All right, backing up. So Sector 2 was for the FAT. Sectors 3 through 11 contain directory entries. And so these are just kind of laid out one after the other. Each one is 32 bytes long, so in each sector can hold 8 directory entries. So you have 9 sectors allocated for directory entries. That means there's a maximum of 72 directory entries available on the diskette. Now, again, we can only have up to 68 files because you have to allocate a granule for every file. So there's only 68 granules to be had. I didn't actually look, so I don't know if when you're doing a dir, does it physically refuse to go beyond 68? I don't think so. I think it'll continue on. So theoretically, you could put fake directory entries at the end of the directory if you wanted to. We'll talk about it a little bit again a little bit later. Within those directory entries, so the first 8 bytes, if the first byte is a 0, it means you've got a deleted file. It means it was used, but has since been deleted or killed. If the first byte is a hexadecimal FF or 255, it means that directory is unused. Otherwise, those 8 bytes represent the name of the file. So, if you save the name as myprog/bat, then this would be the myprog, MYPROG. So I think the rest of the 8 bytes would be padded, I think they're padded with spaces, as I recall. Let me look here for a second. Yeah, so blanks, it's filled with blanks is my understanding. So, yeah. So 8 bytes backfilled with blanks if your name is less than 8 bytes, and then your extension, so that'd be like myprog/BAS. The extension is the BAS part. You get 3 bytes for that BAS. The next byte gives you a file type, and so it's actually encoded some amount of what types of files you have. So you'd have 0 for a basic program, 1 for a basic data file. You can have 2 for a machine language program. It says you can have 3 for what it calls a text editor source file. So that would be like a normal ASCII file. That's all it lists. I'm not sure how much flexibility you might have with putting different file types in there. Pretty sure you have to get these right if you're going to be using basic programs. Or machine language programs. I'm pretty sure I've had trouble when some trouble a lot of people have. They have trouble when they create a disk image and use the toolshed tools or whatever to copy a file into a disk image, and they load the disk image and can't run the file because they've forgotten to mark it as a machine language program or something like that. So I do think some of the programs, some of the utilities like Loadem or whatever, and I think do check the file type. Your mileage may vary. Anyway, so there's that 1 byte for the file type, and then there's a byte for what's called the ASCII flag. And so if the value is set to 0, then it's a binary file. If it's set to FF, it's an ASCII encoded file. Not sure how important this is for anything other than basic program, but that way the load or whatever command knows what to do, whether or not it needs to do conversions, tokenization or detokenization or whatever. Anyway, so finally the next byte after all that. It points at the first granule. So this is basically the head pointer for the chain in the FAT. this first granule that's actually allocated for this file. So when you're walking through the directory and you find a file name and you're interested in, and then you want to read it out of the actual diskette itself, you use this byte to index into the FAT to find the granules, the information to see, how far to go into the next, how many sectors are used in that granule, or if the entire granule is used, it'll tell you what the next granule is to look at, that sort of thing. Okay, so then the next 2 bytes are listed to tell you how many bytes are used in the last sector of the file. This one was a little curious to me. Why do you need 2 bytes if each sector is only 256 bytes? I don't have an answer for that, but according to the documentation, it's 2 bytes. So probably you have a 0 and then 1 byte. But if you know of some other reason to use that, I'd love to hear that. Okay, and then for whatever reason, the next 16 bytes in a directory entry are marked as reserved or unused, whatever. I'm not sure what they had in mind for those 16 bytes. Maybe at one point they were thinking about adding support for either longer file names or maybe for subdirectories or something like that, but it's just left over down. That's what the ROM expects, but nobody actually uses it, so that sucks. Anyway, there's a maximum of 72 directory entries just because there's only 9 sectors allocated for directory entries. Again, you can put 8 directory entries per sector, so that'll only give you 72 entries, but of course you need at least 1 granule per entry. You can only have 68 granules anyway on a normally formatted disk, so what's the big deal? What else are you going to do? Alright, so I don't know how hard that was to follow. Hopefully not too bad, but I think it's going to have to go for now. If you have any questions, feel free to send in some feedback and ask for more details, or tell me what I screwed up. That's fine. So feedback at CoCoCrew.org. I'd love to hear from you. All right, moving on to section on programming. As a basic programmer, you may not need to know anything about the file system that I've just described. Most commands, of course, load and dir and list and whatever. Load and dir, take care of the directory access for you. If you already know the file names you want to use, open and close. We'll open a file, so it can find what they need to do to set up, and then as you continue to access the file with input or print or get or put, it'll take care of all that directory access under the hood. You don't need to worry about it. So about the only time a basic programmer needs to worry about the file system at all is just if he needs to interrogate the file names on the disk. If he doesn't know what file names are on the disk, he wants to load a data file, but he doesn't know what's available, and wants to present them to the user or something like that, then he'll have to figure out how to navigate the directory. But then he can just open the file by name and then move on with his life. So, that's not too bad. However, if you're programming in assembly language, and yourself, you're going to have to access, you could go off and access the hardware, and that's your own punishment if you want to. But you can access the disk hardware through a ROM vector at a hexadecimal C004. You communicate with, this is called disk con, so disk control, I guess. You communicate with DiskOn through another ROM vector, which basically it just points at physical disk access, a track sector, that sort of stuff, disk track sector. It gives the address of the buffer that you're accessing, and that's at C006. And you just basically have to read and write a sector at a time. And so in that case, if you want to find anything on the file system, you'll have to understand the file system well enough to read the directory and find the file that you want to access, and then from the directory find the head of that file, and then navigate the FAT to continue accessing the granules that are part of that file. And you'll need to do them one sector at a time. So, fun. You may want, if you ever go through that, you'll probably want to develop a library so you'd only have to write the code once. Judging from the examples in the Disk Extended Color Basic manual, you will need to turn off the disk drive motor yourself for some reason. I guess it leaves the drive spinning just so you don't have to spin it up every time, which would make things move a little faster. But when you're done, you need to turn the motor off yourself, so it's clear at hexadecimal FF40, which is the drive controllers. There's a control register there. Anyway, if you need to go and do that, I recommend you hit the manual, which is the Color Computer Disk System Owner's Manual, and maybe also the Disk Basic Unraveled. Make sure you know what you're doing. Okay, so a few miscellaneous things. The later versions of Disk Extended Color Basic included the DOS command. It's primarily added so that people could boot OS 9 without having to type in that program at the front of the OS 9 manual or whatever. This command does pretty basic stuff. It loads the entire contents of track 34 to memory at address hexadecimal 2600. It then interrogates the bytes at 2600 for the ASCII values O and S. And so if it looks at 2600, it finds an O, looks at 2601, finds an S. It then assumes that it's got a valid piece of code and jumps to 2602. And so there you go. That's how Nitrous 9 boots. There's a little more to it than that, but that's how it gets started. And if for some reason you want to write a program, then put it on diskette and be able to start it with a DOS command, well, that's the key to how to do it right there. Let's see. Let's talk a little bit about directories. If you wanted to have a special file, or like essentially a hidden file on the diskette, if you create a new file on the diskette, it's going to go looking through the FAT and pick any granules that aren't already marked as used and use them for your new file. That's kind of undesirable if you want to play nice with, say, for example, the DOS command. Like if you have that boot track sitting out there on track 34, you're going to want to mark the FAT so that those granules are not usable by any other files. And we'll leave that as an exercise to the reader, but I'm sure you can figure it out. Similarly, you could do this if you wanted to make a diskette. Say, for example, you wanted to make a diskette that was usable both in Disk Extended Color Basic and in OS 9. Then you could mark the OS 9 bits in the FAT, and then they would not be accessible from Disk Extended Color Basic. then you'd probably have to do the equivalent thing on the OS9 file system to mark out the disk extender color basic files. It's theoretically doable. I'm pretty sure it can be done, but I don't really have the details beyond that. But again, an exercise left for the reader. It should be fairly obvious now that if you had multiple directory entries, they could point to the same actual file, the same actual start of a file in the FAT, and the FAT would then be shared between the two files, and then the last number of bytes, the number of bytes used in the last sector, could differ between the two files. Is that useful? I don't know, but maybe it's useful. So you could have two different file names pointing at the same file, possibly with different links. I think, could you make use of that? I don't know. Maybe some devious person, Brett Gordon or whoever, could figure that out. There's your challenge, Brett. Now, one other thing, I have seen this done with some of the Infocom diskettes in the archive. You have all those directory entries out there. You could theoretically put messages in the file name parts of the directory, and then have them point essentially to a null file or a one granule file or something like that. So you could just put message in there like, we'll type boot to run program or something like that. It's kind of cute, kind of cool. All right, so moving on just a little bit. So the FAT, you have a lot of unused data in the FAT. Since the special byte values for the FAT start at 192, that gives you 0 through 191 for values to say, when to use the next granule. So you could have up to 192 granules within the FAT. There's enough space for that within that one sector. If you had a disk with, say, 40 tracks, you just make your FAT a little bigger. Seems like it would work. Similarly, the directory track could have up to 16 sectors for directory entries. They give you up to 128 directory entries. So that you could then, again, if you had, that would give you up to 64 tracks worth of granules. Like I said, you could already have up to 96 tracks if you could find a disk to do it. 40 tracks certainly is within that. I'm pretty sure if you do a little poking, you don't have to rewrite the code. And you can get 40 track support with a little poking. I don't have the numbers, the exact details here, but you can see where you don't need a new file system to get to 40 tracks. You just need the code to make sure it follows the data as it's presented. So that's the only question. If you had if you put your disk extended color basic program onto a 40 track disk, or somebody else did it, how smart is your program? Is your program enforcing 35 tracks somehow on itself? Or if it's presented with a 40 track version of the same file system, will it still work? I would advise that you not be smart enough to screw yourself if you don't have to. So, but that's an exercise left to the reader as well. Okay, well, we've talked all through this. I'd say we have a couple of open questions that, probably mostly only available through speculation or may just be lost to history. The first question I had was what about Sector 1 in the directory tracks? If you notice, the FAT was in Sector 2, the directory entry started at Sector 3. So what about Sector 1? And so I couldn't find anything documented It looks like maybe in some of the other Microsoft-inspired systems, the disk-based basic systems or whatever, the Sector 1 was, of course, that would be originally on track 0 or whatever, but Sector 1 could have been used as either informational about the file system, could tell you something about the file system, whatever. Might be a good place to say, hey, this is a 40-track file system instead of a 35-track or something like that. Could have been, probably also more likely, in my opinion, is it was reserved to be some sort of boot block, which is how it is used in the DOS version of the file system, which is a bit more complicated than what we've talked about here. Could they have used something like that in place of the track 34 for the DOS command? They probably could have. It might be one of those that whoever came up with the DOS command had no idea what Microsoft had in mind for something similar when they came up with it. Who knows? But typically, in other systems, you might have a boot block like that, and you'd load that 512 bytes. And that would be just enough code in that 256 bytes. And there'd be just enough code in that 256 bytes to figure out how to load the rest of whatever you're wanting to boot and as a boot system. And that could have been an implementation of the DOS command, a bit different from what we ended up with. Wouldn't necessarily be any better. Might actually be a little bit more trouble to deal with if you had to write it. Wouldn't be any worse. Wouldn't necessarily waste as much space on a diskette. Hard to say. So anyway, going through this one, I came up with one more question. So the directory entries are 32 bytes, and 16 of them are completely unused. They're marked as reserved. So maybe they had some idea of how to use them. I'd like to know what that was. Maybe they were going to support longer file names or something like that. It's hard for me to imagine what else they could have been useful for you're basically double the necessary size. You have the current usable part of the directory entry was 16 bytes, and then you reserve another 16 bytes just for the future. What did you have in mind? But maybe it was just that they knew they needed to reserve a few bytes, and adding that one more bit of length is the easiest thing to do. Powers of 2, that sort of thing. I don't know. Anyway, so that's probably got to be left for speculation. So I think that's all I've got on the Disk Extended Color Basic File System. Not a lot of ooh or wow or whatever great stuff. It is, comprehensible. If you do need to write a program that needs to access the diskette directory and manipulate it, or at least use it for finding information or that sort of thing, pretty easy to do, I think. If you do need to do something a bit devious and stored in the file system, there is there's space in the directory entries to do it if you can figure out how to make use of it. There's that extra sector in the directory track. There's 16 bytes in the directory entry. There's extra sectors at the end where you could have more directory entries. Figure it out. Do something cool. Let me know what you figured out. All right, well, I think that's going to have to draw this to a close. Hope you've enjoyed it. And, all right, thank you. Take care. CoCo forever.
Your computer is an extension of your mind. Doesn't it deserve protection? Why can't the Practical look fabulous?
Introducing high-fashion dust covers from Radio Shack.
Tandy has collaborated with fashion designers from Paris, Milan, Barcelona, and Berlin. Introducing the Soft Shield Collection by Tandy. Pamper your CoCo with luxurious ermine and silk. Drench your TRS-80 Model 3 in delicious blue velour with faux alligator piping for a whimsical yet alluring look. Bring out the playful side of that Model 4 with emerald and gold serpentine veiling. Your computer will be ready for the runway in no time. The Soft Shield Collection, only available at Radio Shack, a Tandy company.
Welcome, CoCo Cruisers. Today we've got a little treat for you. We've got an interview with somebody who's reasonably prominent in the community, somebody who works on some cool projects and does some nifty stuff, and even shows up at CoCo Fest to share it with us. Of course, I'm talking about Mr. Brett Gordon. Hello, Brett.
Hello, guys. Thanks for having me.
Cool. Welcome to the program. And, of course, I'm John Linville, and we're joined as well by, of course, Neil Blanchard. Hello, Neil.
Hello, everyone.
Mr. Ron Klein. Hello, Ron.
Hey, everybody.
All right, very well. So let's just start off slow, Brett. Give an overview of, how did you become aware or involved with the CoCo, and, just we'll evolve the story from there.
Well, it started long time ago. I was 7 years old. It was 1982, Christmas. My father was a very forward-thinking businessman, and he kind of understood the power of computers. And at that time, it was, the home computer, the home computers busted onto the scene like crazy, of course. And he thought it would be smart to go to Radio Shack and buy a color computer too for us for Christmas. He did not anticipate me being the actual user of the computer. It was actually, he bought it for my older brothers, that were in their teens at the time, but they didn't really care about it, but I did. So I ended up using a lot of it growing up. And very fond memories of, banging away at that, our little CoCo 2 machine, learning BASIC. I actually learned BASIC on my dad's lap. That's a true story. It was before I could really read. I could read a little bit, but I would sit on his lap and he would read that big, the extended color BASIC book, the big wide one. And,
Sure.
And we'd go through a chapter at a time, and me and him learned BASIC together. And I just went bananas with it. I took it forward and it became my machine, and I never let anybody else use it in the house. And that was all fine and well with the rest of the family. So they didn't have to deal with me at all also. And the CoCo I actually got it might be a little rare. Now, I'm not really, really good. Anybody who knows me knows I'm not very good with memorizing or exactness of the way I speak and stuff. So I'm sure you'll get comments of well, Brett was technically wrong with this, and he said the wrong word there. That's kind of the way I am. I'm very much more of a general, big idea kind of guy. And
Sure.
But I owned a CoCo 2 with 64K with a melted keyboard. That was I think it's a little bit of an odd bird because 64K, I remember distinctly having 64K.
Sure.
It was badged 64K.
Wow.
And, but as far as
Yeah.
CoCo 2 stuff, that was the end of the story. My dad refused to buy software for me. He said, well, now that we know how to write software, if you want a game, you just have to write it yourself. And that was
Right.
not the end of it. So I was very used to going over a friend's house, playing the Commodore 64 and going, oh, this is a really cool game, and then going home and basically banging out a primitive version of it on the CoCo 2, usually in BASIC because I didn't really know assembler until later on.
Right.
That's I think that's very common of people my age. I probably spent entirely too much time in front of a computer. Then
Yeah,
I started, I got a little older and I was able to mow some lawns and get a little bit of my own money. And I still didn't buy software, but I bought I believe it was a DC-10 300 baud modem. I might have the model number wrong on that. And it was on sale at Radio Shack for $10. I mean, how can you beat $10, right?
Yeah.
With
Yeah.
with a Vidtex cartridge. So that's when I discovered like BBSs and the whole online thing back in the 80s, and I never looked back. That was just completely awesome to be able to, hook a modem up to the phone line, totally monopolize the household's telephone, and
Yeah.
go like crazy. I was born in the 216 area code, which is Cleveland, Ohio, which at the time had, I think, the most BBSs of all time. I mean, we had thousands, and I'm not lying. There was no reason for me to ever make a long distance phone call, and I had just tons and tons of usually Commodore 64 boards to connect to. I had, if anybody's familiar, back in the old days, there was a community service called the Freenet, which was actually the internet before, the internet for the public before anybody even heard of the internet. I was privileged enough to belong to that. That's where I learned a little bit of Unix stuff. I learned a lot of IRC stuff that was fascinating to be able to talk to people in real time throughout, the whole world. It was just completely nuts as a, maybe a 12 or 13-year-old, and made lifelong friends over the IRC that I still see today, still meet up with and still laugh. Folks from all different backgrounds, which is fascinating to me. And the CoCo lasted until about 86, 87, and then my father brought home an IBM PC, so old clunk dunk from work, and of course that the modem fit on that, and I kind of became a PC head after that. So I guess it's not really CoCo stuff, but still brings my love of BBSing, and well, of course, the love of BBS became the love of the internet. I went to Miami University, moved off to college, and the internet was very, very new. I mean, it was 1994. I was one of the only people that actually knew how to connect my computer to the university computers, via modem, of course. And that's when I learned even more about learning how to work with VAX systems and all those weird things they had at college. And that's where I found Linux at that time in 94, 95, I believe it was. Linux was pretty new. It wasn't the new. I think Linux came out in 93, I think. I installed it in 94. It was Slackware, which was one of the first distributions. And it was fascinating because it was a whole new world I'd never heard of, never seen before, other than maybe dabbling a little bit with the Freenet stuff, which was Unix servers too, like a pseudo shell account. And pretty soon I was teaching all my friends and staff and faculty how to do emails and setting up ways with teachers to actually email homework in. I actually did a part of my English class was actually to analyze public speaking, or not public speaking, but a casual conversation. And we were supposed to tape record conversations going on in the dorm room, which was kind of risque because, do you experiment on the people without them knowing they're being experimented on? But it's English class, so they probably didn't care too much about that kind of stuff. But I came up with a brilliant idea. I said, you know what? It would be so much easier to transcribe this stuff. I'm pretty lazy. I've always said I'm pretty lazy. I don't like to do a lot of work. I said, can I just go into an IRC chat room and log it all? And it's still a conversation. And my English teacher thought it was brilliant. And it, took about half the time of anybody else because they didn't have to tape record and then transcribe it all. I could literally have the dump file, and then I actually it was a discourse analysis, I think is what it was. So just a lot of fun times. A lot of good friends I've met online, and that's kind of how I got involved with the CoCo, really, and how I got involved in computers in general was from the CoCo. Now, I don't do CoCos as my job. Or CoCos. I haven't done computers as my full-time job. I mean, it's always come in handy. I was a business owner for years, which, of course, being savvy in computers saved me a lot of money and
No doubt.
But I've always done it as a hobby. I've never wanted to do it professionally because I felt it was going to ruin the fun of it. I've always wanted to be kind of, sitting down at a computer and enjoying actually programming a computer.
Well, yeah, can vouch for that. Sometimes doing it for a living does take some of the joy out of it, for sure.
Well, I was really worried about that when I went to college. I actually went to college for physics, and I probably should have went into CS, knowing what happened with the internet and the millions of dollars people were making. I kind of missed out on some of that, I'm assuming, but I still love to sit down at a computer, especially a CoCo, and bang out some lines of code and just kind of see where it leads and experiment. So I'm not a professional programmer. I have absolutely no experience with it other than just a few odd jobs that people have had me do, or a couple business people that have wanted me to help them do databasing stuff. And I do actually have some SQL experience from back in the day. But so I'm kind of kitchen, if you know what, I'm kind of kitchen. So that's how I got originally involved in the CoCo, but I really left the CoCo because, honestly, all my friends had Apple IIs and Commodore 64s growing up, and even a couple TIs, I think, were involved in there, and some Ataris and stuff like that. But I really basically knew nobody that had a CoCo growing up. I mean, I just was disconnected of being all those BBSs and all that online stuff I used to do. There just was very little CoCo stuff, and that always kind of bummed me out. But so I moved on and got into Linux and learned how to program in C. And if anybody knows Linux, it's like you install Linux and you have all this programming stuff just ready to go. You have a C compiler, you have, editors, you have make and all this weird old fashioned Unix stuff, just ready to go. So spent time. Some online friends helped me kind of figure out how to administrate the Linux. And of course I learned it pretty good too, just doing my own thing. And it was back in, I would say about 2000, we had this massive snowstorm where I lived, and it was boring. I couldn't go to work, just too much snow. Couldn't get the car out of the drive. I was snowed in, and I'm a very sentimental person, so I actually kept my old CoCo stuff in a big box, carried it around to college, carried it back to job to job, to apartment to apartment, and I said one day, so the snowstorm happened, and I said, you know what? I have nothing to do today. I could sit around and drink beer, or I could, let's get the old CoCo out. This is, 15 years after I put it away.
Nice.
And I pulled it out, and the internet was a thing, of course, by that time. So I started looking around on the internet. Luckily, the snow did not knock out my internet for 2 days. And there was just enough stuff online to be able to, I found an assembler. I didn't know assembly at the time, but I found a reasonable assembler for it. And I think I found a couple tools designed to make cartridges out of the bin files and stuff. So I took it one step at a time. I don't exactly remember how I learned assembler. I did some PC assembly. So I kind of knew what assembler was about, but I never really did much of it to say I could remember, how to make a subroutine call and what registers you got to save and don't save. And, I had no methodology so I just trudged through it. And in about 2 days, I actually had my CoCo, C loading M stuff from my Linux box, through the sound card into my CoCo, and I was able to actually program my CoCo. And oddly enough, the TV was on the other side of my living room, and I didn't really want to pull the TV out or move everything over to the TV. So I actually programmed the CoCo headless, blind. I'd type in cload M, and I'd listen to the relay click and load it all in and cross my fingers and, write a little program, see what happened. And I just did that over and over again. And really in a couple of days, I started actually kind of putting it all together. And I said, oh, wow, this is cool. I should do something with this. And that's basically how I got back into the CoCo, and I've been doing that basically ever since,
That's a cool story.
So I kind of left the CoCo and then kind of remarried her in 2000, let's say. And that's really how I know assembler was, I knew a little bit of 8088. 8088's very intimidating with its segment architecture, and it's much more complex than a 6809. So it was great. I got into it, and I did some serial routines. So I could hook my CoCo directly up to my serial port and actually use it like a real terminal, and thing. And one thing led to another, and then I did disk routines, and then I'm formatting disks with my own heart software and barely getting it to work. And at the time, I was looking for CoCo stuff. I was aware of the list, even back when I was in college. I remember the CoCo list.
Sure.
I never was really involved with the email list until I got back into it very recently, maybe 5-6 years ago. And never paid much attention to it because it was always above my head. It's people fighting and people talking about stuff I don't have a clue, PIAs and gimmies and different kinds of memories and memory chips. And it was mostly over my head. Still is, half of it. I met William Estel around that time. Well, I didn't meet him. I met him on IRC is how we met.
How did you bump into him at the grocery store?
Right. It's like 7,000 miles away or whatever it is.
For those that don't know, William lives way far north, and I think it's way far north. It's certainly way out in the hinterlands of Canada.
Oh, yeah.
It takes him like 24 hours to drive to Chicago.
Yeah.
So, he's not usually going to be wandering around in Ohio.
Well, when I bump into people, I count online bump-ins as counting. But actually, we started off at Roger Taylor's, had that website, CoCo 3, and he had a little chat server.
Oh, yeah.
And that's how me and Bill met. We spent hours and hours, and we just giggled about stuff. He taught me, all that stuff that he teaches people how to program. He's magnificent at it. I can't thank him enough. And dealt with all the stupid questions I, threw at him. And we just started talking, and eventually he set up a IRC channel on Freenode, like a proper IRC. So we actually had, not web-based chatting, which was awful, by the way. And that's also Aaron Wolf got involved right about that time, and me, him, and Aaron Wolf, and we just would program, drink beer, laugh, joke, and enjoy our CoCos. All via online. So that pretty much helped me get back, maybe not back into the community, but just into the community, period. That's pretty much brings us up to date. I mean, I've been doing odd projects ever since. I started attending CoCo Fest.
That's what I was going to ask you about. What brought you to CoCo Fest? I seem to remember you being at CoCo Fest when we were still in the Elgin location. Is that right?
No, I've never been to Elgin. My first CoCo Fest was maybe 2013, I think. I had a big change in life. I was kind of semi-retired. I had a lot of extra time, and I heard of these CoCo Fests, and I go, why not? It's Chicago. I mean, I know I'm going to enjoy Chicago. I mean, even if I didn't like CoCo Fest, I'd just leave and go do something awesome in Chicago. It's why not? Just make it a vacation. So I came over on a Saturday morning. I drove all Friday night. Showed up Saturday morning and walked in the festival. It was really cool. Well, I went because I wanted to actually meet in real life William and Aaron. And that was really awesome. I was just, I had no idea what these people even looked like or what they talked like or anything. And it was just great. I really loved it. And it was just a room full of CoCos. And it was just, I think I tried to tread lightly because, I don't know a lot of people. I wasn't really involved in the community back in the day. I don't have a tremendous amount of CoCo history. I was kind of like a little island in the middle of Cleveland of CoCo-ness. Which actually brings up a really interesting story. There's one more story, and I won't go too many stories, but one of my best friends actually is a CoCo person, but we're not friends via the CoCo. He was my drinking buddy back in high school, college days type of thing, and we'd go chase women and, do all the stuff 16, 17, 18-year-olds are supposed to do type of stuff, get in trouble and get out of trouble and that kind of stuff. And I was down in his basement one day, we were just, okay, what kind of trouble are we going to get in today, Rob? And he actually had his CoCo 3 out. And I kind of vaguely remember the CoCo 3 being at Radio Shack. And I go, oh my gosh, is that a color computer? He goes, oh yeah, I got an MPI and I got the he had the if you remember the Rastan thing that would scan the video images, and he had all this just boxes of hardware and floppy drives. I've never owned a floppy drive. All I ever had was a cassette growing up and cable. That's the only piece of hardware I owned other than that modem.
You poor bastard.
Yeah, I know. That's, but and this is like several years after I kind of got out of the CoCo, and lo and behold, my best friend is, a CoCo guy, and he knows like some of you guys, or he remembers the names. Like sometimes I'll mention names to him, and he'll go, "Oh yeah, I remember Chris Burke. I met him at the Rainbow Fest, and and stuff like that." And he's starting to get a little older like me now, so his memory's getting a little fuzzy. But it is funny because it was interesting because how would you meet how many bulletin boards? I was on hundreds of bulletin boards, and maybe one or two of them were CoCo based.
Sure.
So there wasn't a lot of CoCo users. We were kind of laughed at back in the day, I guess, by the Apple users.
Ignorant people.
Ignorant people, yeah. And I was a little ignorant myself, but, peer pressure, I don't really know what's going on. You kind of get bummed out a little bit. But yeah, so it turns out like one of my best friends in life actually was, owned a CoCo 3 and all the accoutrements to it. He got out of the CoCo 3 stuff eventually. He actually went on to start a web hosting company and stuff like that. And for a birthday one time, he came over to my house, brought me a 12-pack of beer and his CoCo 3. So I couldn't accept it. It's a precious gift to me, especially a CoCo 3. I didn't realize how precious they were until getting more involved in the community.
Right.
That is my CoCo 3 that you see at CoCo Fest. Is actually a gentleman by the name of Rob Albertson. It's one of my best friends. That's his CoCo 3. It still is. I'm just kind of a steward of his stuff. I think I've done a pretty good job of maintaining it. I'm not he used to dust it and dust the chips off and vacuum it inside and out and clean the things off. This, I'm not that particular, but I tell him I am.
Brett, that's a great story. I wondered how you got that CoCo 3.
Yeah, and that's how I got it, and it was precious to me, and that's my CoCo 2. Actually, I actually threw out that melted CoCo I talked about. I left it at an apartment because I didn't have time to move it, so I just left it in a big box of really cool computers that you guys would drool over if you knew what was in there nowadays. I had like old CP/M machines and stuff, but I had no idea what they were, and they were kind of old clunky dunks back in the day, and it was just kind of dead weight. And that's where my original CoCo 2 ended up at. But I found another one at a flea market for like $5 back in the late 90s, early 2000s. I was like, oh, look, it's a CoCo. Oh, it's the nice keyboard. I still didn't do anything with it. Yeah. So that's kind of my backstory as far as, my CoCo stuff. I can tell you that it was a lot of fun. I did a lot of basic programming. I was a particular spaghetti head. I wrote code that made no sense to anybody whatsoever. Structured programming wasn't even in my dialect.
Right.
But obviously, Linux and C broke me of that. It was very difficult, I will say. I was like about 20 when I started learning how to program C and Pascal and other, real programming languages. Quote unquote real programming languages that force you into these new procedural programming techniques, right? And I got used to it. Now I really forgot most of BASIC. Like I really, I still remember how to C load M because I typed that no less than 4,000 million times in my life. But as far as writing basic programs, I sort of vaguely remember from when I was 8 or 9 years old, but it's starting to really get fuzzy.
Right, sure. Well, so why don't you tell us about some of the projects that you gravitate towards? What keeps you busy nowadays?
Well, what generally keeps me pretty busy in the CoCo world nowadays is usually I start projects and don't finish them. That usually keeps me pretty busy all to itself. But a lot of times they're experiments, or I get past the fun part and then get to the boring part and then give up. I think that's pretty normal. I got into Phuzix a few years ago. Phuzix, for the people who don't know any better, is a sort of a real McCoy Unix for old-timey computers. 8-bitters, 16-bitters. It's a project that's led by Alan Cox, who was kind of the big Linux guy back in the day, one of the big Linux guys. He was putting this together, and Aaron Wolf, of all people, suggested that I contact him, and I did, and apparently I got part of the project and started working on getting the CoCo 3 platform working on it, and had a blast. Really a blast, because it's a different kind of programming. You know, I'm a very do it my own way kind of guy. Obviously, my isolation growing up with the CoCo helped me do my own things my own way. And so this was a big step forward, because now I had to actually cooperatively program. You know, I had to learn how to handle how to handle patches and send them in, and how not to screw them all up, and spelling errors and etiquette, stuff like that. And Alan was extremely kind, to say the least. Very gracious with dealing with a kitchen programmer like me. Still is. But that furthered my ability to cooperate with the project, and I can't say enough for Tormod Volden. Really was held my hand, and got me in, got the programming environment down for me, so I could actually not have to worry about so much of the nitty gritty of getting all the build environment and stuff ready to go. He did a tremendous job of helping me, and so I learned a lot and had a lot of fun putting Unix on a CoCo 3. And know way more about Unix than I ever wanted to know. Really understand the internals now. I mean, the basics. I mean, I can't say I understand Linux. That's probably more up John's alley than mine, of course. But I understand the basic premises, and I understand the mechanisms behind it now. And probably to the point where I don't really want to know what's going on anymore. But, hunting bugs through, assembler code is pretty tough. But that project's in C. We do have a C compiler. We're using GCC 6809, which is a port of GCC, the well-known GNU compiler. That was kind of built up through the years by different people, but it started with a German fella. I don't have the name in front of me. It was taken over by someone at Mark Williams' company, the pinball guys, the Defender 6809 guys, that whole company. That was Brian Domini, I believe his name is. Put it together better, got a little bit more going on that on that compiler, and eventually William Estelle made a lot of changes to it. I've actually patched it a few times, trying to get weird bugs fixed and stuff. So, and that's what that whole project's compiled in mostly, and a little bit of assembler down at the low level stuff, stuff that has to be fast, or stuff that you just can't do with a C compiler, like moving stacks around and stuff like that.
Right.
And it's very interesting dealing with, the limited capacities of a CoCo and dealing with C code. It's kind of interesting what you got to do and what you have to be aware of, to program it efficiently. It can be done efficiently. It's just you have to really kind of like compile it, look at the assembler, compile it, look at the assembler, compile it, look at the assembler, until you realize, local variables are just horrible in this case, or that kind of thing. Right. So it's been a lot of weird learning stuff, and I'm sure I've forgotten half of it. I mean, if I was smarter, I'd make notes. If I was more diligent and more academic about it, I'd be, more on the ball. But again, not my job. No one forces me to do this stuff. I'm doing it on my own accord. So, no pressure.
Right.
And as far as Phuzix goes, I mean, I guess I'm more or less officially in charge of the CoCo 3 stuff. Tormod's handling the CoCo 2 and the Dragon stuff in particular. I'm in charge of doing the drive wire stuff, because I think I can do that stuff pretty good, the drive wire. I'm also in charge of the networking stuff, which, John, you may have some experience with, being a Linux guy in the networking stuff, which is a whole nother world of learning things that really got pretty intense, and I have to get around to that, but I was taking a little break to let my brain clear out and give me a couple brain cells left over to actually get back on the networking side of things. But I won't take total credit for the networking. I'm basically just taking pieces, parts from other people's projects and combining them together to synthesize a networking stack for Phuzix. And that's
Cool.
kind of where I'm at with that. I've been taking a little bit of break. Phuzix is actually going to be going on its 0.3 release pretty soon. It's in RC right now, which means we're just chilling out, fixing bugs. I think a lot of the Europeans are on vacation. I think they like their August vacations. So we're just waiting for that to happen. And then we'll probably go into pre-4, whatever they call it, and I'll probably gear up when it gets colder outside. I'll probably start sitting down with the CoCo hardware-wise more often and bang out some more code and get some graphics going and probably work on the networking a little bit better and a few bug fixes here and there. So that's usually what I try to spend my time on doing. I've also been involved with the Play-Doh term project, if anybody's familiar with that here. I kind of was roped into that by Tom Cherryholmes. He kind of got me involved in that. I remember reading something on, it wasn't Facebook because I don't do Facebook, but maybe G Plus or Twitter or something, about this Play-Doh term thing that I, again, never heard of it before. I guess it came around in the 1960s. It was University of Chicago, I think, was a big proponent of it. I guess in my day and age, it's basically like a glorified BBS. Don't tell Tom I said that, because it's like a graphical BBS. It has a lot of graphic stuff going on in it. So
Yeah.
And there was something very similar in the BBS world toward the end of the BBS days. There was a couple graphical clients that were starting to pop up, but not really Play-Doh stuff. This Play-Doh stuff's kind of neat. It has a really strong historical bend to it that's kind of interesting, actually. And it's been kind of neat taking, modern hardware or modern compilers, modern code, compiling them for an old CoCo 2 and 3 to use something that was invented in the 1970s, early 1970s, late 1960s. It's kind of, it's kind of bizarre. Phuzix is not far from that either, by the way. It's kind of like, is it new? Is it old? I'm not sure what it is. It's kind of, it's kind of interesting, but Play-Doh term stuff is actually very interesting. It was actually, some of the tech terminals had the same graphics capabilities. They were actually based on the Play-Doh format, actually. It's, Tektronix, if anyone remembers the old vector graphics, the old clunkadunk terminals from libraries. That was based on Play-Doh stuff. Actually, they're still able to somewhat talk to each other, which is fascinating. So there's a lot of history, but it's also new stuff. We're taking new code, new C stuff, putting it on old CoCos, and I don't know. It's just fascinating looking at some of the old stuff. And I've been working a lot on that recently, trying to get that working on the CoCo. Working all right. I released a binary and about ready to release another one that works with the RS-232 pack so people can use their Wi-Fi modems and whatever they can hook to their CoCos via that. And that's my two principal projects right now.
That's cool. That's really impressive. You had Yados.
Yados. Mm-hmm.
What was that all about?
That was it was an experiment, but it was also frustration with the disk extended color basic.
Oh yeah.
In disk you get your disk drive, and that's great. And then someone invented HDB DDoS. Boy, that's a tough one to say. And that was cool. That allowed you to talk to a real floppy or something else. It might be a drive wire. It might be a SCSI drive. It might be an IDE drive. It might be, I don't know what else there would be, but I think there was a few more drivers in there. And basically you could install it on your ROM, right? Just like you would a DECB. And we put that together, and it gives you, your real floppy and one device. And I said, but what if I want to take my Super IDE card, and what happens if I want to transfer files from my Super IDE to my drive wire, or vice versa? There's no way to do that. And I said, boy, and I looked at the basic code and I looked at the assembler and I said, discon, that's the low-level routines that got been replaced by HDB DOS to kind of expand on them a little bit in different ways. And I looked at it and I said, you know what? I think I can put multiple drivers in there. Like, there's no reason why I shouldn't be able to have a whole bunch of different drives hooked into my CoCo. And I can understand at the time I didn't really even own an MPI, so there was no physical way of actually doing a lot of this. But I knew it was possible, and I kind of knew how the MPI worked, so I put it together, and I just started throwing every driver I could find. I basically hacked up HDB DOS to my own likings, and it's been a real trooper for me. I use it every day. It's on every one of my machines. It's what I boot my CoCos on. It's basically HDB DOS on steroids. I don't use it a whole lot for that anymore, but I mean, it was really fun because I could actually use like the actual basic, copying and backing up and stuff, and I could just copy files from one file system on a disk drive to the DriveWire drive or to the Super IDE drive all at once on the fly. And that's what I wanted to do, so that's what I did. And it's a sort of published work. It's a little bit of closed source, so I can't really release it legally speaking. I would love to. I mean, everybody's willing. I'm willing to release it. The problem is I don't really know how to apply copyright to it because my work, I wouldn't mind copyrighting my work or just keeping it free. I'm a GPL guy. I don't mind releasing my hacks for free to let other people hack on it.
Sure.
But the problem is it includes a lot of Disk Center Color Basic, which is owned by Microsoft. So I didn't really know how not to taint my license with Microsoft stuff. So it's never really been open sourced, but I wouldn't really care giving it away. And I've had some people install it and they hated it. I mean, flat out, it was just too complicated. It was too confusing. But it was written for me, by me, and I was never really intended anybody else to use it. But I had a lot of fun, and that's where I kind of got into a little bit of operating. So, like looking at, drivers, okay. So I have a lot of, that probably helped me with the Fusic stuff, because I could deal with low-level drivers. And I wrote stuff for the Super IDE, the floppy drive, the cassette, over and over and over. In fact, I'm really tired of writing disk drivers. I really don't want to do it anymore. It's just so boring. Right. Open, close, read, and write is pretty monotonous after a while. But I guess I'm good at it, and I had enough code that laying around on my hard drive where I could throw it together really easy for Fusics, and that got that moving along nice and fast, especially the SDC support and DriveWire support was kind of done by Tormod, but I kind of improved on it and put some utilities in there to actually make it a little bit more easy to use from user space, stuff like that. Got the serial stuff working, so we have like virtual serial ports working, and that stuff's pretty cryptic, not documented. It's head scratchy. It's a lot of threading problems. It's a lot of you have to try it and see if it works. Experimental. You can't just. We're dealing with multiple threads, so you always have this head scratching thing. Like, well, it should work, but testing is the only way you're going to be sure. And then even then, you could still have some asynchronous bug come and bite you in the butt somewhere down the line on a problem you've never seen before. That's just one of those multitasking type dilemmas that you can always run into with that stuff. But really, it's been a wonderful experience. I came to CoCo Fest and really dug it. I mean, it was one of those light years. And I didn't really know anybody other than William and Aaron. But I met a few people and saw a lot of possibility there. And, I came the next year and I came the next year and I came the next year. And I think I've been there maybe 6 times now, maybe 6 years in a row. And I plan on coming this year. And now I get excited about it. In fact, I don't even think about it because I get too excited. I get all tense and anxious. And so a lot of people, that's the way I am. I tend not to think about things until the last minute because I get too anxious about them. And CoCo Fest is one of those things I get pretty darn excited about. It's like, well, I get to stay up for 3 days straight and totally geek out with other geeks in a basement and not see the light of day and eat pizza.
Sounds good.
This coming year, hopefully it won't be in a basement. At least you will see the light of day. Maybe.
What if I want to be in a basement?
So I hope that doesn't
Can I still be in a basement?
You'll spend time inside as much as you want, but
We'll have to put some shades on the window.
So, Brett, I got a question for you. I'm not sure if it's something that you can even talk about right now, so this may get edited out, but I got to ask about your back orifice client for the CoCo.
Oh, yeah, that's a cool project. Yeah, that's actually a really cool project. It's so vast and so ridiculously pretty wild. I don't really know where that project's going, Ron. What I did was I started working on a network stack for the CoCo, TCP/IP type stack in assembler, hoping that maybe the OS 9 people could use that to put networking in OS 9. And in BASIC, if someone wants to write a standalone program, there's a little bit of a code base there that they can, open up a UDP port and start talking on the internet. And, and I kind of had a lot of that stuff from Physix, although that stuff's in C. This is straight assembler, and I had a lot of fun with it. But you get to a certain point, and you got to make sure stuff works. You have to come up with some sort of application, like something to actually do with this stuff. And that's maybe where the dilemma is at right now for me. It's I'm able to do a lot of, internet stuff with the CoCo, but I don't have a clue on exactly what to do and what to do with it. I was looking at maybe something like NFS, Network File System, for the CoCo, which would basically be drive wire over internet. Honestly, I was looking at, we have to come up with some way of, if other CoCo users use this networking stack, what are you going to do with it? Nothing really talks unencrypted stuff anymore. That was kind of a more modern thing. Like in the old days, you could get by with, TCP, and you could still connect to HTTP, web servers and download stuff. And we could do that on a CoCo. The problem is there's just no open servers anymore. They bump you right off. They say, sorry, if you're not encrypted, we're not going to talk to you anymore. So unfortunately, I was a little bit late to the game on that. We got TCP/IP on a CoCo, but can't really be used for much. It's very, very limited things. So it's kind of a head scratcher. Like, okay, well now we need encryption, but that's mathematically pretty over my head. I can do it, and I have done basic principles, but is it really going to be all that effective on a CoCo? And I think a lot of people are leaning toward going to offloading stacks where, we have a little machine, maybe an ESP66 or 8266, or I'm thinking of maybe a Raspberry Pi or any of the little Linux chips that are out there to kind of like offload TCP and WizNet, stuff like that, that lets maybe a little more modern machine do the, the heavy lifting as far as encryption and stuff goes. And yeah, that's great, but it's sort of like just like a modem. I mean, it's sort of not romantic at all. Like, to me, if the CoCo's not putting the IP packets together, it's not really that much fun. So I came up with the idea, well, what can we do with CoCos? Because we can't really connect to normal things and, across the internet. I mean, there's a few chess servers and I think I watched all the whole ASCII invade. What was the Star Wars done with ASCII? I watched that all on the CoCo. So it actually works. There's stuff you can do, but that's about it. You can't, even Wikipedia won't even let you pull up a text, an unencrypted thing now. So I have my CoCo, it sits on the internet. I don't know what to do with it. So I thought, well, okay, I'm willing to open up my CoCo to the world unencrypted because it's a CoCo. I don't really care. If you want to come in and hack my CoCo, I would probably really enjoy that. Please let me know if you do. I think it would be a fun, it reminds me of the old days. I have another story, but we won't tell that one. And so I came up with this idea, let's look at existing technology, what is the Internet of Things? Because really the CoCo fits pretty well into the Internet of Things. Low powered, low memory, probably even lower than the Internet of Things, be honest with you. Nowadays, the computers are just so powerful and the integration is ridiculous. But it fits pretty well, and I'm still kind of like hemming and hawing which way do I want to go with that. But so I just put it together like a really, really simple little UDP server. UDP is like real fast, real easy, real light. You can't do much with it because it's not reliable, but you can send packets back and forth. So right now I'm working on an actual web, or not a web server, but an internet server that sits and just basically it's a packet relay. You can connect to it with a CoCo. CoCo sends its packets and it gets routed via its own internal network, like I don't want to get too technical here, but like a user space network. Very similar to what the IoT stuff is doing. We're just creating a little network of CoCos over UDP, which is over IP. So we're a little bit of encapsulation there. Very, very similar to like, let's put together, how you turn on a Windows machine or an Apple machine and it finds all your printers automatically for you. Network discovery.
Yep.
Multicast DNS, stuff like that. That's the technology that I'm looking at, saying, okay, how can we apply this to the CoCos? Like, I want to find Neil's CoCo, but I don't know his IP address. We're behind firewalls, so we can't really directly talk to each other without each other knowing each other's information. There's barriers, but if you have a central server, you can kind of bounce off that, trade the information around and get around all the hoops and jump through the flaming hoops. And eventually I can find my CoCo from anywhere in the world now and connect to it with another CoCo. What to do with that, I have no idea. There's no application for it yet, but it actually does work. I rent a server that's ready to go. It actually has my handwritten server software. It's not a server running on a CoCo, by the way. It's actually on a real modern, it's on a virtual machine sitting on the internet somewhere. But it runs, my software I wrote. But really, it's nothing more than maybe a redo of, John, I think you mentioned it to me one time, MRQTT, is that the protocol? Like a subscribe?
Yeah, MQTT. Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely one thing I'm looking at pretty seriously. Like that's probably just instituting that actual protocol on the CoCo because it's pretty simple actually. And probably what I was going to lean toward doing anyway. I mean, I like to experiment. I like to look what other people have done, but also seriously look at how it can be simplified or what we can do with the CoCo. So one of the very simple applications that you can do is a debugger. I mean, debuggers are extremely simple. And a network debugger is something where, I can connect to my CoCo and basically take over my CoCo from anywhere in the world. And let me take a step back. Right now, I'm not actually in front of my CoCo very much. I usually have to work with emulators because I'm on the road a lot. I have parents getting older and getting sick and stuff like that. So I'm always on the road visiting friends, family, going to work things, going to CoCo Fest, stuff like that. And I do a lot of backpacking in the hills and stuff like that up in the mountains. So I'm not always around a computer. I'm not always around a CoCo for sure, but I would love to be able to work my CoCo from across the world, from across the internet. So what's the simplest way to take over a CoCo is basically make a network debugger. And debuggers are really simple. You only have to do 3 or 4 things to a computer. You have to implement 3 things to make it work. You have to be able to read the CoCo's memory. You have to be able to write the CoCo's memory, and you need to be able to tell the CoCo to execute memory. There's 3 basic primitives to John, you probably know this from actual being a computer scientist guy. There's probably some guy that it's named after, Turing or someone, Minsky or one of those famous guys that said, these are the 3 fundamentals of what you need to do with a computer. You need to be able to read memory, write memory, and execute memory. So if you do that, and I've done that over a CoCo, and I've fooled around with it enough to know that I've done similar projects in the past, but not involving the internet. But basically, I can take my computer, I can take my CoCo, stick it on the internet. It talks to this central server, my client software, which is a C program running in Linux, or it could be another CoCo, by the way, or Fusix. Finds the server, connects to my CoCo via the server, and then basically starts sending it read memory, write memory, and execute memory commands, which basically virtually gives me total control over my CoCo, almost, other than, like network errors and or, power failures and stuff like that. I'm able to basically take over my CoCo and do whatever I want with it without creating really, really complex software on the CoCo end. It's basically just, read the CoCo memory, write the CoCo memory, execute the CoCo memory. And with combinations of those three things, I can load Nitros, I can load Physix, I can load custom assembly, I can improve the network stack. I can actually load the network stack in on top of itself, reboot it over the network, and, if I want to program changes, I can literally do it over the network. I don't actually have to be physically in front of my CoCo. So that was the idea. That's a very simple problem that I had that I wanted to solve, and it's been it's been a lot of fun, actually. I will give any warning. I mean, if you would like to connect to the, using the software, you are basically giving me every ability to take over your CoCo. So be warned. And I want to use it that way. I think hacking into someone's computer, is totally illegal, of course, nowadays. It always was illegal. But this is a fun way of letting someone have control over your CoCo, and really the sky's limits, because once you have those three commands, you can wedge anything you want in there. Like, John, I could use your, floppy drive controller like it's one of my own, or vice versa. And you can just, the sky's the limit once you can do that. You can just keep wedging stuff in there. Once I can figure out your computer, then I know what HDB DOS you're running, then I can literally stop it from running. It makes it look like it's working. You can actually still use BASIC and stuff, but in the background, the IP stack is constantly noodling with things. And, just hacker stuff, just goofy. How do you play with the computer across the internet? Because I physically I can't drag my CoCo everywhere I go, but the internet is almost everywhere I go other than when I go into the woods. And that's the problem I'm trying to solve. So it's kind of contrived. I mean, I invented the stack and then came up with the problem, but, it's, that's me. Way too
That's
technical.
really cool.
Yeah, Brett, I'm going to put my CoCo online. Give me whatever client software I need.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah.
You're gonna have my disk controller.
Well, that would be magnetic. I would love to just get a video of that happening. I think it would be just a fun, unique thing to sit there and okay, I'm going to use Neil's hard drive, and John's disk drive, and I don't know. I could boot up Nitrous on your machine. You wouldn't even have to be anywhere near it. I could literally hit a button and, given the network is slow and all that stuff, but it would eventually load Nitrous and you would, I could totally take control of your machine. So, or I could just do it in the background and let BASIC keep on thinking it's the only program running, but it's actually not. It's, so it's just fun hacker stuff, really, more than anything else. Nothing malicious about it, of course, but I will give a warning, if this ever does become a thing. You've been warned.
Well, it would be cool. I agree with you. It would be somewhat entertaining just to see someone come in and get my CoCo on the net. It's like, I can't believe you're doing that. Oh, Brett, stop it. That's what it would be. Have to call you up. Get off my CoCo.
I had a really funny story because when I was learning Linux in the old days, when I was in college, I had these few IRC friends that were helping me, administrate, how do you set up the, all those stupid little files that require, that. I remember in the old days when you installed Linux, before Red Hat, of course, and before nothing worked. You'd install things and everything, the files would be wrong in the wrong place, and and you could get it working, but it was a lot of manual labor. And of course, Red Hat was probably one of the first to really put it together into something that actually was that you could just install and it worked. And
right.
You know more about that than I do, of course, John. But
I want to.
Yeah, right. I'm sure there's a whole hideous story behind that too. But basically, I was still kind of learning Linux and learning how to program and what I do. And I would present these problems to a couple of guys on IRC. Well, they took it upon themselves to completely hack into my Linux box behind my back, no knowledge at all, like literally hack into my machine at night. And they would fix random things. They would just go in and fix things, like I would complain about something and then the next day it would just apparently just be working again, or something. It was so funny. And I had, of course, being a geek, I had the Oka Data, the dot matrix printer sitting on the shelf. And I'll be, one morning at about 3:00 in the morning, I was probably having a few beers, partying with friends, and all of a sudden I heard that Oka Data whirl up and and there it is.
Nice.
Hey, bro.
Somebody was sending you a drink order.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, bro, by the way, we fixed your, we fixed your mountain, your M tab, which mounts what hard drives you want to work with when you boot up the machine or whatever. And then it was nuts, and that's, of course, the true essence of hacking, but it was very beneficial. They would come in and teach me how to do that and teach me how to fix, how to fix Linux up and make it work properly. And I don't know where 13-year-olds would ever come up with this much knowledge. It was like and I think they're kind of semi-famous people now. I don't know the real names because it was all IRC handles and, back in the day when nobody used real names, And they were like really young though. I mean, they were like 13-year-olds and I have no idea how they would ever know so much about Linux or Unix in general being 13 because I was already like 19, 20 years old and I don't know what, and was very well aware of computers. But I don't know how someone younger would know so much more than me. And it blew my mind. And,
right.
But it was good times. It was really good times. It showed me, I don't know. And that's sort of, I guess I'm reliving the past, but I'm just doing it with a CoCo rather than an IBM PC now. So. And so
nothing says you can't do both, right?
Right. So, and these are just, you got to admit, people always, they kind of get on me like, and I get on myself, like, I start projects, I don't finish them. People want me to do things, but it's also like sometimes I don't see why anybody would want to do this. Like,
sure.
You want to hook your CoCo to the internet, but why? What is, we have to have some sort of network or what are we going to be doing with our CoCos on the internet? Like, there's not much you can do with, with the internet at large, but maybe if we put a bunch of CoCos together, even virtual ones, like I can have a virtual compute, I have a virtual CoCo that hooks up to my virtual machine to do the,
sure.
So it's 24/7 and I actually have one in the house I can plug in. I don't have the network rebooting, so it's not foolproof, but it's, it works. I've proven to myself, like, yeah, this whole stupid idea of being able to take over my CoCo from anywhere in the world actually would work. It's kind of nuts, but fun. But I don't know what you would do with it. Other than like, hey, I did it.
Well, what you need with the CoCo getting online, you need to connect to the death clock. I think that would be a good first app.
Death clock? I'm not aware of the death clock. What is that?
You basically answer a few questions and it'll tell you when you're going to die.
That's a little morbid. What if it tells you you're already dead?
Yeah, it's a joke, but that's something out on the internet. You can connect to the death clock. Yeah.
And it's like non-encrypted because there's not a lot of non-encrypted stuff anymore.
Oh yeah, I don't know about that. So Brett, what
like you say.
Oh, go ahead, John.
I was just going to say to do much on the internet these days. I mean, the encryption thing. You basically need to hop eras just to make the bridge. So if you really want something internet content to show up on your CoCo, you really need something in between. Maybe that's the handoff where we need to find the next generation of people who think that intermediate bridge is the cool thing, and set them up with their own DOS fest or or whatever. Then we can have ambassador groups go between the different retro shows. Then we have a retro United Nations.
Yeah, because I really firmly believe that using the CoCo on the internet has limited application. I hate to say it. I don't want to bust anybody's bubble. Maybe back 10 years ago, it would have been a possibility, but now not even Wikipedia won't even serve you a web page unless you're encrypted. I mean, that's nuts. I mean, it's Wikipedia. I don't know why that would have to be encrypted other than, if you're willing to take the risk. I don't see why Wikipedia would be so funny about it, but maybe there's some security stuff behind it on Wikipedia's end. I don't know. But when Wikipedia shut me down, I was like, really? It was like, well, it's not much we can do with the telnet connection anymore, or just simple TCP. So that's kind of a bummer. That's kind of like the bell's ringing, saying, hey, move on. You got to offload that stuff. And I hate to do it because I really like to see the CoCo. It's been really fun. It's actually quite simple. The internet's not as intimidating as it seems at first. It's just a lot of old 1970s language, computer sciencey stuff that no one ever talks anymore. But once you read enough recommended for comment RFCs, you start figuring it out, and it's not hard. I mean, the machines that were doing the internet weren't much better than the CoCo is back in the day. So it actually
is it the old Gopher clients that used to use like a telnet type connection? I don't remember it was Gopher. Maybe I'm thinking the wrong thing.
Gopher's just like the web. It's just TCP. Everything uses TCPs, I get a little upset about Al Gore when he said he invented the internet. But when you realize the history of what Al Gore did for Gopher, it actually brings into light a new thing. And, when he got laughed at because, he said that the internet's a bunch of pipes, and everybody laughed at him. They said, oh, silly you, it's a bunch of packets. Well, the next thing you do with the packets is you build a virtual pipe. And that's really how the internet works, is on those pipes, not on the packets. The packets are cool and interesting and, neat. But, yeah, that's, so it's interesting you see politics. When you start learning how it actually works, you're like, oh, well, Al Gore was sort of right. It really isn't really about the packets. It's really more about the pipes. TCP. It's about having a virtual serial connection across to two different computers, So, interesting, but... In other words, this is another project that it's fascinating to me, and I'll continue with it when I have more time or when it gets snowy outside and I'm not outdoors. I'm outdoors like 99% of the time, by the way. I sleep outside all the time. I'm a sort of a hiker vagabond who kind of does his own thing in life. But when it gets cold, I'll be sitting down and working on that more because that's just fascinating to me. I don't know if anything useful will come out of it. I'm not going to make any promises, but I will say that I will be having fun while doing it. And that's the goal, right?
Well, that's cool. That is definitely the whole point. The whole point of the hobby is you should be having fun and doing the technology. Not there's a practical application is kind of secondary, as long as you enjoy it while you're building it, or maybe it's practical for you, but not for anybody else. That's good enough. Anyway. Well, Brett, we've been talking for quite a while now. Appreciate you taking your time to share some stories with us, some information about you and your background and what sort of projects you've been working on. I think our listeners will enjoy hearing all that. So again, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you for listening to me blather on and on.
Do you have anything else you want to add? Ron or Neil, you got any further questions or?
No, actually, I just wanted to thank Brett for for joining. We definitely appreciate it. I've talked to you quite a bit at the fest and things like that, but it was neat to hear some of the background. That was one thing I didn't really know about you, so I found it very, very interesting. Thanks for sharing that.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for putting up with me.
All right. Well, so once again, thank you, Brett, for joining us, and I think we're going to draw this one to a close.
Oh, I got one more thing though I got to do. Because I promised myself I'd do this. I just want to see. Okay, I'm going to do it. Ready? Jim Jerry. Okay, let's see how that edits out.
Ding.
Good night, guys. Thanks for having me.
New from Tri-State Pictures. A fun day at the circus.
Hey, check it out. Let's go in there. Yeah, let's do it.
Except for the curious.
3 new players. players for my game.
Not cool. Let us out of here.
The sound you hear is the air being pumped out of the chamber.
This guy's a psycho here.
High above you are balloons filled with oxygen. Pop the balloons if you want to live.
It's too high. We can't reach them. Look over here. It's one of those clown trampolines.
Come on, start jumping. It's getting hard to breathe. Not cool.
If any of you die, you all die.
Clowns and Balloons, rated R.
Welcome back to Neil's Corner on episode 51. I am, of course, Neil Blanchard. Well, for this month, I was almost at a loss for what to review. But then, wouldn't you know it, a few nights ago, I'm hacking around with terminal software on my CoCo, and I get a private message late in the evening. It was from a fellow named Paul Fiscarelli. He wanted me to test a game he and Simon Jonason coded called Run Dino Run. Well, this was very exciting, a new game to play for my CoCo 3, sent to me just like that. Well, the first thing I did was copy this disk image to my SD card and gave this game a spin. I was surprised even before loading the game. When I typed dir to see a directory contents on the disk and to figure out what file to use for loading the game, I was greeted by a cute character graphic dinosaur. The file name above this graphic dinosaur is called dinorun/bin, and underneath it is where the character graphic dinosaur is. Upon loading the game, you are first presented with a title screen that reads Run Dino Run by Paul Fiscarelli and 3-voice music player and advisor of madness by Simon Jonason. Advisor of madness indeed. After all, he is the mad coder. The game itself is actually quite addicting. It's a simple continuous run style game. Once you press spacebar or joystick button to start, your dinosaur will begin running across the screen, and your job is to guide him over and under obstacles that get in your path. You only have one life, and the longer you go, the higher your score increases. It keeps track of the highest score. My best so far was in the 1400s. The scrolling is super smooth, and the 3-voice music playing in the background is fantastic. You can also change the tunes by pressing the right arrow key. This game requires a CoCo 3 and keyboard or joystick to play. It uses P-Mode 4 graphics, but requires a CoCo 3 because of the way they are using the FIRQ for audio and high-speed poke. Now, I was chatting with Simon, and he told me he's in the process of making a GMC version of this game. If so, the game will run on a CoCo 1 or 2 and not require a CoCo 3. I'm really looking forward to that. Paul and Simon will be releasing this game as a free download very soon. Probably by the time you hear this podcast, it will be available. Well, yet again, there you have it. Another brand new game you can enjoy on your CoCo 3. Until next month, game on and CoCo forever.
AutoTerm turns your CoCo into the world's smartest terminal. Scroll text forward and backward. Save, load, and delete files while online. Full support for the RS-232 pack, X modem, and even split screen for packet radio. Screen widths of 32, 40, 42, 51, or 64, plus 80-column support for the CoCo 3. Switch instantly to word processing mode. Find strings instantly. Create text. Make corrections, save, or load files. Then upload them to a remote system. Fully compatible with Telewriter. Plus full automation tools to automate dialing, keystroke, macros, uploading, and downloading. AutoTerm runs on the CoCo 2 and CoCo 3. No other computer can match your CoCo's intelligence as a terminal. AutoTerm from PXE Computing, Richardson, Texas.
Well, it's that time again. We have reached the end of the podcast, episode 51. We hope you enjoyed this month's release. I'd like to thank our host, John Linville, for once again procuring all the news articles each month, and for providing us with another amazing tech segment. You know, he might have taken a break last month, but man, did he ever redeem himself with this one. Wow, a 45-minute tech segment on Disk Extended Color Basic. What's not to love? I certainly enjoyed it. Also like to give thanks to Mike Rowan for creating all those awesome commercials and editing the podcast. Big thanks goes out to Boise Pete, our official CoCo historian. You know, I say he remembers it, so you don't have to. Can't forget to thank Ron Klein for being full-time co-host on here now. Huge thanks goes out to Brett Gordon for giving us some of your time to record an interview with you. Last but not least, a big thanks goes out to all of you who listen and support us each month. We really do appreciate it. Feel free to send us any feedback you may have. Until next month, happy cocoing and retro forever.
It's a blast from the past.
Please listen carefully.
CoCo. 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 CoCo.
Dance like there's no tomorrow.
What is this crazy rock and roll music anyway?
It's a blast from the past.
Dance, dance, dance. Dance, dance, dance. CoCo. CoCo.